Chapter 150. As soon as the two of them entered the theater, Drew shook Nicole off and ran to the front row of the crew. Nicole only saw Drew whispering a few words to Tom Hanks, who was sitting next to Eric. Hanks smiled and got up to give her his seat. Although she was envious, Nicole knew very well that she was not even qualified to sit in the front row, let alone make anyone in the front row give her a seat. Although she was a little unwilling, the girl found a seat in the middle of the theater and sat down. More and more people came to the theater. Unknowingly, a man in his 30s, wearing glasses, and looking gentle sat down next to the girl. The man seemed to inadvertently glance at the girl and revealed a look of surprise, as if he had just noticed the beautiful girl next to him. He took the initiative to greet her. "Hi, how are you?" Although the man's tone was very casual, the girl, who often encountered similar situations, realized that the man was trying to hit on her when he sat next to her. Although she was a little disgusted, Nicole could not ignore the other party's polite greeting. She said in a flat tone, "Hello." The man didn't mind Nicole's coldness at all. As an experienced player, if he backed off just because a lady was cold at the beginning, then he would never be able to get a woman. "Forgive my rudeness, miss, but you're really too beautiful, especially your hairstyle. Coupled with your facial contours, it makes you look like a classic beauty with a cold and elegant temperament. You know, many girls nowadays are used to perming their hair into fluffy little wavy curls, but in my opinion, that hairstyle is like a bird's nest. It's terrible to the extreme. Girls with such good taste like you are really rare." When Nicole heard the man's compliment, there was no joy in her expression at all. Instead, there was a flash of embarrassment. She replied somewhat helplessly, "Thank you for your compliment, sir." "You're welcome." The man smiled and said, "My name is George Rosen. I'm a film critic for Premiere Magazine. You can call me Nicole." "Nicole? Is it Nicole? Wow, I suddenly feel like this name was created for you." In Greek, Nicole is used to describe a young woman who is beautiful and delicate on the outside, but strong and independent on the inside. Just as George Rosen was about to say something, the lights in the screening hall dimmed. For some reason, when she thought of how cold Eric had been to her during this period of time, the girl felt a little disgusted with the man who was trying to strike up a conversation with her. She reminded softly, "The movie has started, Mr. Rosen." "Of course, I understand." George Rosen realized that he was too eager. He quickly sat up straight and shifted his gaze to the screen. After the opening credits of the Statue of Liberty in Columbia, the little girl in the red hoodie released the fireflies. After drawing a string of beautiful characters, they rushed into the sky and turned into the brightest star in the sky. After that, the screen fell into a short period of darkness. The sound of footsteps could be heard, as if knocking on the audience's hearts. However, the movie still did not appear immediately. The list of the main cast began to appear on the screen. Amidst everyone's curious anticipation, the screen finally lit up. In the dim corridor, Tom Cruise, who was wearing sunglasses, was climbing the stairs step by step expressionlessly. At the same time, a mysterious and sad male voice could be heard singing. Nicole was staring at the screen intently. However, she heard two girls whispering behind her. They should be Cruise's fans. "Oh God, I suddenly realized that my little Tommy is so handsome when he walks. Mickey, I can't stand it anymore." Me too, me too. "Erica, we must go up and ask Tommy for a few more autographs later." In fact, Nicole had the same feeling in her heart, although she did not know why. Fortunately, there was a professional film critic nearby. George Rosen also heard the feelings of the two female fans behind him. He approached the girl and took the initiative to explain in a low voice, "This is the result of the atmosphere. The echoes of footsteps, the mysterious singing, the cold scenes, and the silent protagonist form a very infectious picture, so it's not strange that they have this feeling. Eric Williams is indeed a genius. With just a few simple scenes, he has highlighted a completely different style from his previous two movies. If the lighting of the picture was adjusted to normal, without the background music and echoes, or even with other background music, these few scenes would not have achieved the same effect. This kind of thing may seem simple, but to be able to perfectly combine several elements to form an irresistible appeal requires a very high level of artistic attainment. It was obviously not wise to talk about other men in front of women when picking up girls. However, George Rosen treated Nicole as an ordinary fan. He did not think that the girl sitting here would have the opportunity to meet Eric, let alone know that she would know Eric. Therefore, he was not stingy with his praise for Eric, and at the same time, showed off his professional skills in film appreciation. After arriving at the rooftop, as the camera followed, the background music gradually became heavier. After the hero stepped on the edge of the rooftop, the screen began to switch between memory and reality. Through the dialogue between Andy and the doctor, the audience was told that Andy only had 4 weeks left to live. Ugh, is Tommy going to jump off the building? The worried voice of the girl behind Nicole was heard again. This was actually the voice of many fans in the theater. Another girl immediately hugged her friend and comforted her. No, Erica, look at Tommy carrying a backpack. He must have other things to do. If he's going to jump off the building alone, why would he carry a backpack? Mickey, do you think Tommy will die? Definitely not. I've heard many reports of terminal cancer patients surviving. Besides, this is a movie. All kinds of miracles can happen in movies. Tommy has never died in any of the previous movies. He will never die. I hope so. Erica crossed her arms and made a praying expression. At the same time, she was looking forward to Cruz's next move. However, the movie didn't immediately reveal the answer to the audience. After the title of Dark War was displayed, the screen switched to a restaurant. Sean, played by Hanks, was leisurely reading a newspaper as he ate his breakfast. The camera quickly panned to the bar in the restaurant. Andy was also eating his breakfast calmly. At the same time, he looked up at the television with a hint of reluctance and nostalgia in his eyes. The two protagonists appeared at the same time. The audience thought that the two would have a confrontation in this restaurant. After all, the name of the movie was Dark War. However, the screen quickly switched to another scene. Nicole, did you notice Cruz's expression? He only has 4 weeks to live. So, whether it's eating, drinking, or watching the television, his expression is full of concentration and reluctance. It's as if he wants to use the remaining 4 weeks to engrave all the beauty in this world into his soul. I dare say that Cruz will definitely die in the ending. George Rosen couldn't help but show off again. Nicole merely nodded slightly to indicate that she had heard him. Her eyes were still fixed on the screen, and the girl slowly began to immerse herself in the plot. Inside the blockade line, Sean got out of the car and hurriedly entered a police car. He asked Ian Spy, the police chief played by Joe Pacey, who was wearing an inspector's uniform and a bulletproof vest, "Have you talked to the robbers?" Ian's eyes flickered. 20 minutes ago. Sean immediately raised his eyebrows and turned to look at Ian in surprise. You were the one who talked? You must have said that you were Ian Spy, the chief of the Los Angeles Central Police Department, and that you would surrender in 3 minutes, right? Ian shook his head awkwardly. Then, he realized that Sean was now his subordinate, and no longer a well-known elite in the police force. So, he straightened his neck and looked to the side with a look that said, "What are you going to do about it?" Joe Pacey's performance was very funny in terms of his words and actions, and the audience began to smile. Although Sean was a little helpless, he still had someone play the recording of the negotiation. A hand pressed the play button, and Joe Pacey's special voice rang out. "Hey, I'm Ian Spy, the chief of the Los Angeles Central Police Department. You've been surrounded by me. Surrender in 3 minutes. Sean shook his head with an expression that said, "I knew it." Ian guiltily looked out the window again. In the recording, the robbers made a series of conditions. When Ian heard that the other party wanted a bulletproof car, he couldn't help but retort, "Why don't you want a helicopter?" Hearing this, Sean shook his head and stomped his foot. There was a hint of helplessness in his tone. "Hey, don't talk nonsense if you don't know anything." The atmosphere that Hanks and Joe Pacey had created for the audience exploded at this moment. Following Sean's frantic actions, the audience burst into laughter for the first time after hearing this line. Sure enough, the robbers changed the conditions and changed the bulletproof car into a helicopter. Sean could only sigh. He asked for a walkie-talkie and entered the bank alone. After a series of verbal and psychological exchanges, Sean successfully resolved the hostage crisis and forced the mole to commit suicide. Although Eric didn't make any changes to the plot, he had consulted a real negotiation expert. Therefore, the lines were more reasonable and sharp. Even a professional couldn't make any mistakes from this verbal exchange. Of course, the plot was dragged out by a few minutes because of this, but this wasn't a problem. The movie was originally only 90 minutes long, but in Hollywood, most big productions like this were about 2 hours long. In addition, the lines were cleverly designed. The audience didn't feel that the plot was dragging at all. Instead, they could interpret the excellence of the male lead, Sean, in more detail. After leaving the bank, Sean walked to a snack bar and bought a cup of Coke and a hamburger to eat. In the crowd of onlookers, an old man with thinning hair had a strange smile on his face. He held up a camera and captured Sean's series of actions. The old man's expression was a little stiff, but coupled with the iconic mysterious male voice that appeared almost at the same time as the background music, although most of the fans still had some doubts, the professional film critics present all guessed that the old man was most likely Andy in disguise. Sure enough, the scene cut to a room full of computers, camouflage equipment, and other high-tech criminal props. Andy had developed a photo of Sean at the scene of the bank robbery and pasted it on the wall. At the same time, there were other old photos of Sean when he was in the SWAT, Special Weapons and Combat Team. Through the camera sweeping across the wall full of photos and clippings, the audience finally understood Sean's identity. Chapter 151. Andy walked into a finance company with his backpack. Amidst the sneering of the manager of the finance company who took out a stack of Marvel superhero comics from his portfolio, Andy took out his pistol. The secret battle between the two had officially begun. "You're here, I've been waiting for you for a long time." Andy covered himself with the body of the finance company manager and greeted Sean warmly as he walked up to the rooftop. "Sorry, traffic jam," Sean replied with a smile. There was no sense of unfamiliarity in his tone. This was the most basic quality of a negotiator. No matter how much he hated the other party and wanted to throw the other party into prison or the electric chair, on the surface, he had to maintain a sincere friendship with the criminal. Only by getting close to the criminal could he find the other party's flaws. "You can call me Sean. How can I help you?" Many people have their own goals. Some want money, cars, planes, and some want to see their wives. "Do you have a girlfriend?" After getting Andy's permission, Sean slowly walked forward and began to approach him. Andy didn't answer. Instead, he leaned out from behind the finance company manager's body. When Sean wanted to move away so that the sniper in the opposite building could take aim, Andy stopped him. "Am I very smart?" Looking at Sean's helpless face, Andy laughed. "Yeah, what's your name?" "Just look it up. What do you want?" "It's very simple. I want to play a game with you for 72 hours. You want to play with me? No problem. The hostage is innocent. Let him go and I'll take his place." Bang! The muffled gunshot rang out, and there was a burst of exclamations in the theater. No one would have thought that Cruise, who always had a positive image in the movies, would shoot an innocent person without hesitation. More than half of the invited fans in the theater were Cruise's fans. The two girls behind Nicole also exclaimed in surprise. "Ah, how could this be, Mickey? How could Tommy do this? He's not really a bad guy, is he?" "Definitely not, Erica. Look at that manager's wretched appearance. I think there must be something wrong with him." Although the girl named Mickey said so, her tone was filled with uncertainty. "It seems that Cruise's character has made a huge breakthrough this time," George Rosen said. Although his voice was not loud, it was loud enough for Nicole to hear. However, when he glanced at the indifferent girl beside him, he realized that she was not interested in the topic. Thus, he had no choice but to stop his analysis. Due to the cautiousness and cowardice of Joe Pacey's character, Andy managed to escape into the building through the air vent. Amidst the chaos, the manager of the finance company crawled up from the ground. "Help! I'm not dead!" "Ha!" In the reaction room, the fans, who had been worried, let out a sigh of relief. Then, the hilarious scene of Ian's stupidity and Sean's madness appeared again. When Sean helplessly stuck the Hershey's chocolate box in front of Ian, the theater was filled with joyful whispers again. Hershey's chocolate. Someone in the dock repeated the line in Sean's tone with great interest. If the executives of the Hershey's Candy Company were here to hear this, they would definitely be glad that the $500,000 advertising fee was well worth it. Andy, who had escaped from the building, got into Sean's taxi due to carelessness. The two men began their first head-to-head confrontation. "Send me to the police station and you win," Andy said. He stuck the pistol out of the car window and pulled the trigger without hesitation. A muffled gunshot rang out. Sparks flew from the lamppost, the balloon in the child's hand suddenly burst, and the cardboard box in the porter's hand exploded into pieces. Andy put a hand on Sean's shoulder and said in a cold voice, "I'll shoot on the count of 3. 1, 2. Sean turned his head to look in the direction of Andy's gun. He wanted to bet that Andy wouldn't shoot, but when he saw the pregnant woman with a big belly, the woman with a child, and the student with a backpack, Sean stepped on the gas pedal at the last moment. He didn't dare to take the risk. But it was too late. 3. Hey! Sean shouted in horror and looked nervously at the pedestrians in front of him. Everyone was safe and sound. When he turned his head, the back door opened and Andy was gone. Hey, Mickey, did you see that? Tommy's last shot was actually aimed upwards. The girl's excited voice rang out again. Yeah, this character is actually a good person, the girl named Mickey echoed. He's both good and evil. I'm starting to fall in love with this character. Eric Williams is really amazing. I've never seen such a character in other movies. Mickey laughed. Most importantly, he's so young. I heard he's not even 19 yet. He's younger than both of us. Huh. He's just a kid. In that case, I still like Tommy more. Hee hee, the other girl laughed when she heard her companion's infatuated voice. Nicole, who had been sitting quietly in front, couldn't help but reveal a faint smile. After spending more than a month together, this shrewd girl had a deep understanding of Eric. She secretly thought that with Eric's methods, if he were to make a move on these two girls, it wouldn't take long for them to be bewitched and disoriented, forgetting about Tom Cruise to the back of their minds. However, the girl quickly recalled her own experience and became a little gloomy. Is he really, like what Drew said, he doesn't like me? As if to set off Nicole's depressed mood in the dark, the ethereal and sad music of Speechless Love came from the sound system in the theater. Andy, who was sitting on the bus, was stopped by the police. He calmly got up and sat next to a girl on the right in front of him. Brooke Shousey's appearance was still stunning. However, under Eric's suggestion and the makeup artist's meticulous sculpting, the girl's originally thick eyebrows were made thinner. There was no lip gloss on her lips. Her long hair was soft and smooth, and she only had a layer of light makeup on her face. This change made the girl's temperament change a lot. Originally, when many people saw Brooke Shousey in magazines, they would naturally think of her as a goddess. But at this time, the girl's appearance made her temperament become much softer and more beautiful. The goddess temperament that made people flinch at the sight of her faded away, and she became a woman who easily made people want to get close to and protect her. In the front row of the theater, when Brooke Shousey, who was sitting in her seat, saw her appearance, she suddenly became nervous. She was still a little worried about the change in her temperament. The girl secretly looked back. Because of the light on the screen, she could clearly see the facial expressions of the audience in the back rows. She could see that many men were staring at the big screen. Many of them had an infatuated look on their faces, and their mouths were slightly open. Obviously, they were attracted by her appearance. Seeing this, Brooke Shousey was a little relieved. She turned her head with a sigh of relief. As long as the audience's reaction was good, it would be fine. As for the film critics, after experiencing several golden sour plums, she no longer had any hope of being recognized for her acting skills. As long as she could gain popularity among the audience, it would be fine. After all, there were many popular stars in Hollywood who had terrible acting skills. In the picture, Brooke Shousey, who was playing Yo-Yo, curiously glanced at the strange man who suddenly appeared next to her. Unexpectedly, she found a gun handle in the man's open collar. Her face showed a faint fear, but she didn't dare to show it. "It'll be fine if you don't talk," Andy whispered softly. He took off his sunglasses and put them on the girl to block her eyes that were flickering with fear. He took off one of the girl's earphones and put it on himself. Finally, he hugged the girl and let her lean on his shoulder. Chapter 152. As the music continued, Yo-Yo, who was leaning on Andy's shoulder, unknowingly turned from panic to calmness. Perhaps it was not a bad thing to have such an exciting, romantic encounter in her boring daily life. As she thought of this, a faint smile of happiness appeared on her face. Because of the girl's tacit understanding, Andy successfully passed the inspection. He returned the earphones to the girl's ears and got off the bus. When Yo-Yo realized what was going on, she hurriedly asked the driver to stop the bus and followed him. He put one hand in his pocket and walked lazily on the sidewalk. She lowered her head and carefully followed behind him. Occasionally, she would raise her head and look at his back timidly. Andy finally couldn't take it anymore and suddenly turned around, scaring the girl. "Why are you following me?" I live here," she explained in a panic, like a little girl who had been caught doing something bad. Andy saw the girl take out the key to open the door and was about to leave. Only then did she realize what was going on. She shouted and ran after her, stuffing the pair of sunglasses back into Andy's hands. Nicole did not know that Eric had copied the movie from her mind, so when she saw this scene, she could not help but think about herself and Eric. He seemed to treat her like this, domineering and distant. After the climax of the first scene, the plot of the movie went back to normal. In the police station, Sean chattered endlessly to his colleagues about his doubts. Ian, who was a little narrow-minded, looked at Sean's enthusiasm and thought about his own mediocre self. He felt that his position might be threatened because of this, so he decisively used the fatal magic weapon of a primary school student, a complaint. However, he was stopped by Sean's superior, who had a good relationship with him. He could only angrily go up to Sean and cause trouble. However, his actions reminded Sean of the crux of the matter. At Ian's unintentional reminder, Sean slammed his fist on the table. "Stupid, I'm so stupid. I forgot the most important clue, the finance company. Here, we can check it out." Ian was even more depressed. He had no choice but to use his words to mock Sean's identity as the logistics manager. "The lights in the corridor are flashing non-stop. Quickly get someone to change them." Sean's investigation did not get anyone's cooperation. The manager of the finance company had a guilty conscience, the villain was wary of the police, and other people were unwilling to cooperate. Sean could only return to the office and receive the screw sent by Andy. That night, after fooling the old guard at the front desk, Sean successfully entered the building where the finance company was located. He used the milk powder to cleverly unlock the door and enter the finance company. The second confrontation with Andy had begun. The sound of hurried footsteps on the stairs, the sudden alarm of the safety door, the roar of the car engine, the fierce friction between the tires and the ground, and the several minutes of gunfire, coupled with the intense percussion music, the confrontation that lasted more than 20 minutes did not have any extra scenes. The whole process tightly captured the audience's eyes. Finally, the two got rid of the villain group's pursuit. The car drove on a quiet street in Los Angeles at night. "Ha! The situation seems to be reversed this time. The gun is in my hand. Do you know where the nearest police station is?" Sean raised his eyebrows and patted Andy's shoulder with the gun. There was a bit of pride in his expression. Andy laughed and scolded him for being ungrateful. Then he said, "Same old rules. You win when we get to the police station." The car suddenly accelerated. At the same time, the audience's hearts, which had just relaxed, were hung up again. Everyone was curious about how Andy would escape this time. Amidst the screams of many girls in the theater, Andy stepped on the gas pedal and without hesitation, hit the cement barrier on the side of the road. Bang! With a loud bang, the windshield shattered and the airbag popped out. Sean, who was in the back seat, was shaken. In an inconspicuous small shot, because of the shattering of the front window, a small medicine bottle that Andy had placed next to the window bounced out a few times on the cement road. The scene slowly froze with the crisp sound of the small medicine bottle hitting the cement road, and then it fell into darkness. Here, Eric made a big change from the original version. He removed the scene where the two men wobbled and fought for the gembox. Eric felt that this scene was completely superfluous and meaningless. It also affected the rhythm of the movie. If the original 20-minute confrontation was like eating a bowl of spicy noodle soup with sweat all over one's forehead, then the snatching of the box was more like picking out half a caterpillar from the noodle soup with chopsticks at the last moment. Eric thought about it and felt that the purpose of this scene was to make Andy lose the small medicine bottle that contained the terminal cancer painkiller to cause Ian to misunderstand. So, Eric only used a small medicine bottle to cleanly and neatly set up this clue. After struggling in the darkness for a long time, Sean suddenly opened his eyes and found himself in a hospital ward. After the doctor's introduction, Sean knew that he was fine. He picked up his suit and casually hung his tie around his neck and walked out of the ward. Ian stopped Sean with a solemn expression, and the two of them started a funny conversation that didn't seem to make sense. "Hey, don't lie to me about this." Sean explained, "It's like this, I had an appointment with a friend for dinner, and on the way," Ian interrupted Sean's nonsense and said, "We found your car. It was full of bullet holes. Someone came to me for revenge. I can't do anything about it. We police always have a lot of enemies. You're still lying to me." Ian pulled Sean to the side agitatedly and raised the small bottle in his hand. "What is this?" "I found it at the place where you loaded the car. I asked the doctor, and he said this painkiller is for patients with terminal cancer." Sean took a breath and seemed to understand something. He leaned against the wall thoughtfully. Ian sighed and put his arm around Sean's shoulder. "Sigh, what a pity. You're so young." Sean raised his eyebrows and looked at Ian, but Ian continued, "It's my fault. I've always been biased against you, but you're also the same. Why do you always contradict me? I'm the bureau chief, and I'm more senior than you." Sean quickly understood that Ian had misunderstood this matter, but he kept nodding and didn't refute. It seemed that it was a good thing to let this narrow-minded boss misunderstand him. As for the possibility of being exposed in the future, he would worry about that in the future. After thinking about this, Sean took advantage of the situation and raised the small medicine bottle. "Western medicine, it's very fiery." Ian put his arm around Sean's shoulder again and repeatedly apologized for his previous narrow-mindedness, which made Sean feel a little embarrassed. Fortunately, Sigourney Weaver's cameo appearance as a female Interpol executive saved Sean from embarrassment. Through Andy's information, Sean understood the meaning of the number 13 written on the teacup cushion that the stranger left him. On May 13th, in the same small restaurant, after a verbal exchange, Sean agreed to cooperate with Andy's plan to capture the villain, the bald monk. In the bowling alley, when Cruz appeared in a rather stunning female disguise, not only was Sean shocked, but the audience in the theater also exclaimed in surprise. When the bowling ball was smashed and the diamonds stolen from the finance company were scattered all over the floor, the villain who had always been secretive was finally arrested. According to the clues that Eric had planted, as long as the bald monk could be brought to the police station, Interpol would cooperate with a series of evidence, and the bald monk would never be able to walk out of prison again. In the chaos, Sean found that Andy had disappeared into the crowd, so he hurriedly chased after him. In the parking lot, Andy helplessly took the initiative to get into his convertible sports car, because this time, not only was the gun in Sean's hands, but the steering wheel was also controlled by him. The Lamborghini convertible sped through the streets, followed by a large number of police cars. "What are you waiting for?" Sean asked after passing through several police lines. Andy leaned his head weakly against the back of the seat. "I've done everything I need to do. But I haven't. If I can't take you to the police station, I'll regret it for the rest of my life. You'll only remember me if you have regrets." Andy teased Xiao En in a gay manner. Sean was silent for a moment. "Don't worry, I won't forget you." Andy shook his head with a smile and coughed violently a few times. Blood poured into his mouth and sprayed on the windshield. Sean's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Andy apologized, lifted the black cloth covering the bomb, and took out a remote control. Sean glanced at it. "This move again? Try it if you don't believe me." Sean raised his hand and pressed the button. With a soft beep, the bomb began a 1-minute countdown. It can't be real this time, right? Andy smiled. You were the one who pressed it. You told me that it didn't matter when or where I died, the key was that I couldn't die in the police station. Xiao En informed the people following him about the bomb through the walkie-talkie. Then, he stepped on the accelerator and quickly passed through the last few police lines. He got out of the sports car in the last 10 seconds of the countdown. Although the two had only known each other for a few days, Sean completely understood Andy's style of doing things. He didn't believe that the bomb was real at all. So, deliberately letting a criminal go was a huge pressure on his professional ethics. So, when he got out of the car, Sean's face was a little heavy. But gradually, he seemed to have figured something out. Gradually, a smile appeared on his face as he walked toward his colleagues in a relaxed manner. After doing things, I'm always hungry. It's time to find something to eat. I wonder if the small restaurant is closed. With that thought, he waved at Ian, who was complaining to him, and left. Unsurprisingly, when the countdown ended, the Lamborghini's engine automatically started, and Andy successfully escaped again. A few weeks later, in the small restaurant, Sean's eyes widened when he saw a piece of news in the corner of the newspaper. Someone had donated a large sum of money to the Children's Cancer Foundation in his name. So, he swallowed the food and the corners of his mouth curled up as if he wanted to laugh, but he couldn't. With a bucket of popcorn in his arms and a newspaper in his hand, Sean passed through the bustling crowd and somehow got on a bus. Just as he sat down, he caught a glimpse of something familiar. Miss, your necklace is very beautiful. Where did you buy it? Sean couldn't help but ask. Yo-Yo picked it up and looked at it. With a faint smile on her face, she said, A friend gave it to me. It's very cheap. Boyfriend? Yo-Yo hesitated and didn't answer. She only said quietly, I haven't seen him in a long time. After he gave it to me, he hasn't appeared again. Sean turned around sluggishly. Keep it well. Although it's fake, it's still very fake. Maybe one day he'll appear in front of you again. Ha, he'll scare you. Yo-Yo smiled but didn't reply. She looked out of the car window. Soon, the girl got out of the car. In the fast and slow shots, Sean and Yo-Yo's lonely expressions appeared one after another. Shoving a piece of popcorn into his mouth, Sean thought of Andy again. Man, it would be great if all of this was just a scam. Just like the fake gun and the fake bomb, your illness was also fake. You just wanted to get my sympathy so that I would let you go. Even if you hide in a corner and laugh at my stupidity, I don't mind. Really? In the end, he thought with a gloomy face. It was like some kind of inheritance. The chanting that would only sound when Andy appeared again when Yo-Yo walked through the streets with the gem. It was like some kind of reincarnation. Ethereal, mysterious, and distant. Chapter 153. The last line of subtitles appeared, and the lights in the theater lit up. As the main creators of the movie looked forward to it anxiously, warm applause rang out. It was not until Eric walked onto the stage with Cruz, Hanks, and the other leading actors, smiled and gestured to the fans below the stage to be quiet that the applause slowly stopped. After expressing his gratitude to the fans and doing a few short interactions, Eric and the others walked backstage as the fans in the theater gradually became excited. Although the fans were a little unwilling, they still left the theater in an orderly manner. Do you know, Nicole? Many directors have their own unique styles in their movies. Not to mention those artistic directors with strong styles, even those commercial directors who focus on the box office, if you study their movies a little bit, you will find that they themselves use the same method in many of their movies. However, this characteristic doesn't appear in Eric Williams. His movies have completely different styles. This can only be described as weird. Because one's inertia is very powerful, many habits will be used unconsciously. George Rosen, the film critic of Premiere magazine, who walked out of the theater with Nicole side by side, explained to the girl excitedly. He found that when the girl heard the topic of Eric, she always showed a little interest, unlike the cold attitude of other topics. Therefore, he decisively stopped commenting on the performances of Cruise, Hanks, and Brooke Shousey, and always changed the topic to Eric. When they reached the parking lot, George Rosen said tentatively, "Nicole, there is a good coffee shop not far away. Maybe we can go and sit for a while. It's still very early, and there's nothing to do when we go back, right?" The girl refused coldly. "I'm sorry, Mr. Rosen. I have to go back soon." Nicole said so, but she stopped beside her car and turned her head to look at the theater behind her. Although George Rosen had been rejected, he realized that the girl did not immediately get into the car and leave. George had never managed to get a cold and elegant beauty like Nicole before, so he was not willing to give up so easily. Moreover, the girl's indifferent attitude had aroused George's desire to conquer her even more. "Nicole, do you like Eric Williams very much?" George quickly thought of another topic. The girl glanced at him and said honestly, "Not very much." George Rosen showed a look of understanding. "Oh, don't deny it. I found that you always like to hear about Eric Williams. Nicole, do you want to see him face to face?" Nicole raised her eyebrows. Faced with this man's persistent pestering, the girl was getting more and more impatient. Unfortunately, due to the light in the parking lot, George Rosen did not notice the slight change in the girl's expression. He still said self-righteously, "You know, I'm the film critic of Premiere." Because of Dark War, Eric Williams will definitely have to accept a lot of interviews during this period to promote the movie. With the current influence of Premiere, I'm sure they won't refuse if we send them an interview invitation. "What does this have to do with me?" the girl replied coldly. "I have a good relationship with the editor-in-chief. If he agrees, I can get this task. When the time comes." George Rosen's expression was a little smug and boastful. "If you want, you can pretend to be my assistant. This way, you will have a chance to talk to Eric Williams face to face. Maybe we will even have a chance to have a meal together." "Oh." The girl spat out a meaningless syllable as a mocking smile appeared on her face. Just as she was about to reject this self-righteous guy, a young man in a neat suit came to the parking lot and ran directly toward the slender and elegant Nicole. George Rosen looked at the young man who came over with a vigilant expression. Nicole was also a little vigilant when she saw the young man walking towards her. She did not know the young man, and she had not yet gotten rid of the one beside her. She did not want another one to pester her. "Excuse me, are you Miss Nicole Kidman?" The young man came in front of the girl and looked at Nicole's outfit again before asking. Nicole nodded. George realized that the two of them did not know each other, so he breathed a sigh of relief. The young man confirmed the girl's identity and said enthusiastically, "Hello, Miss Kidman. I'm Alan Fissman." Seeing the girl's puzzled expression, Alan quickly explained, "I'm Mr. Williams' assistant." "Oh, hello, Alan. Just call me Nicole." The girl smiled and reached out to shake the young man's hand. At the same time, she glanced at George Rosen, who seemed to have realized something, and introduced him somewhat mischievously. "This is the film critic of Premiere magazine, Mr. George Rosen." "Hello, Mr. Rosen." Alan greeted George indifferently. Filmmakers usually did not like film critics. In this era, the film critic groups firmly held the reputation of most movies, but there were very few film critics who could maintain a fair attitude. The film company had to spend a lot of money on this group of people before each release. Otherwise, it would be difficult to get a fair review from them. After greeting George, Alan did not wait for him to respond. He turned to the girl again. "It's like this, Nicole. Miss Barrymore asked me to tell you that she's going to attend the party with Mr. Williams. You don't have to wait for her." "Thank you, Alan. I got it." The girl nodded to show that she understood. Alan did not say much. He nodded at the two of them and turned to walk into the theater again. "Sorry, Mr. Rosen. Can you move aside?" After Alan left, Nicole was about to open the car door and go home, but she found George Rosen blocking her car door in a daze. "Oh, I'm sorry." George moved aside in a panic. When he saw the girl open the car door, the corners of his mouth twitched. He wanted to smile freely, but the muscles on his face seemed to be frozen and refused to cooperate. If Alan had only mentioned Mr. Williams, George could still deceive himself and pretend that he did not understand. After all, there were too many people with the surname Williams. Then, when Alan mentioned Miss Barrymore, George completely lost the ability to pretend that he did not understand. The somewhat strange relationship between Eric and Drew had always been a hot topic in the circle. Of course, George Rosen knew about it. Then, it was not difficult to guess Nicole's identity. Thinking of the girl waiting for Drew here, George felt that she must be very close friends with Eric and Drew. Thinking of what he had said just now, George Rosen felt a strong sense of embarrassment. The girl and Eric clearly knew each other, and he still used the topic of the interview to tempt her. The girl must have laughed at him 100 times in her heart just now. Looking at Nicole driving away as if nothing had happened, George, who was walking to his car in frustration, felt more and more like a clown jumping up and down. When a person encountered such a situation and refused to reflect on their own mistakes, their usual behavior would be to vent their anger on Nicole. Therefore, George directly ignored his impolite pestering and felt that he had been fooled by Nicole. Finding an excuse for himself, George Rosen kicked his car's tire hard and scolded with a ferocious expression, "B*****, let's wait and see." Chapter 154. The ups and downs of the plot, the thrilling soundtrack, the sharp and changeable editing, and the outstanding performances of several actors, Eric Williams has brought us a dark symphony with a different style after the playfulness of Home Alone and the warmth of Pretty Woman. From the mysterious singing at the beginning to the tragic symphony at the end, the gorgeous soundtrack of Dark War runs through the entire movie, but it doesn't make people feel noisy at all. The tight plot is full of tension, and there are no redundant scenes. The 2-hour visual feast makes people feel calm. Blood has always been the two elements that can stimulate the audience's adrenaline the most in movies, but many movies are just claptrap, and they always do it for the sake of sex, and blood for the sake of blood. However, the use of blood in Dark War doesn't feel deliberate at all. During the movie, every time there was a scene where Tom Cruise coughed up blood, I could hear the heartbroken cries of the female fans around me. However, these cries were also mixed with excitement like that of Gao Chow. A handsome, gentle, and mysterious man has already made most women fall in love at first sight, but Eric Williams is still not satisfied, and he added a stimulating blood-vomiting attribute to the protagonist. I'm sure that the character created by Cruise will definitely be imitated by many filmmakers in the future. The wonderful performances of the two protagonists didn't overshadow the brilliance of the supporting roles at all. Joe Pesci raised his eyebrows, twitched his mouth, and shook his head. The reappearance of Brooke Shields, who had been silent for several years, was even more eye-catching. Perhaps it was because the girl had been at Princeton for several years, but Brooke Shields' acting was more profound and restrained. Although she only appeared for a few minutes, she left a deep impression on people. I believe that this time, even if Brooke Shields doesn't get a positive acting award, the Razzie judges will definitely not consider her as an actress. I'm looking forward to seeing Brooke Shields' performance in other movies in the future. The next morning, Eric sat in the dining room and focused on reading the fresh movie reviews in today's newspaper. Nicole, on the other hand, was busy coming and going, bringing breakfast to the table from time to time. Soon, a sleepy Drew floated into the dining room in his slippers. He pulled out a chair and sat down at the table. He supported his chin with one hand and narrowed his eyes as he watched Eric flip through the newspaper. "Why don't you sleep a little longer?" Eric asked without raising his head. "I'm hungry," Drew said. He pulled the small basket in the middle of the table and reached out to grab a bagel. However, he was hit by Eric's rolled-up newspaper. "Have you brushed your teeth after eating?" The girl blinked her eyes and pretended to be pitiful. "Eat after you're done." Eric glared at the girl. He had no intention of indulging her. He waved the newspaper in his hand, ready to hit it again at any time. Okay. Seriously, you're like an old-fashioned old man." Drew stood up weakly and floated out again. She had a bit of fun at the party last night and didn't eat much, so the girl looked very dispirited at the moment. Nicole stood in front of the kitchen counter and listened to the conversation between the two of them. She felt a little envious. Although the two of them didn't have any intimate words or actions, this kind of ordinary conversation made her feel the warmth that only belonged to family. In comparison, although Eric had been very polite to her, he still didn't treat her as one of his own. It wasn't that the girl hadn't tried in this regard, but it wasn't very effective. The girl brought the cooked oatmeal into the dining room and began to share breakfast for them. However, when she gently placed a bowl of oatmeal in front of Eric, she inadvertently looked up and saw Eric frowning slightly at the newspaper. "What's wrong?" the girl asked softly as she sat down. Eric shook his head gently. "Nothing, just a movie review." Nicole glanced at the title of the newspaper in Eric's hand and said softly, "Someone is criticizing Dark War?" "Yeah." Eric nodded and said, "It feels strange. This person seems to be targeting me. I don't remember provoking this person." As Eric spoke, he looked down, hoping to find some information about the author. When some newspapers asked for articles from more famous film critics, they would often include the critic's information at the end of the article to make the readers feel that this person was very authoritative. "So it's a professional film critic for Premiere magazine and a journalism graduate from Columbia University," Eric whispered. Nicole's heart skipped a beat when she heard the name of Premiere. "Eric, can I take a look?" Eric handed the newspaper over. The girl glanced at the author's name and suddenly felt a little guilty. It was George Rosen. A story that can't stand up to scrutiny, deliberately mystifying noisy soundtrack, and repeated meaningless scenes. "I feel that this kind of movie is simply a waste of the viewer's time and money." The girl only took a quick glance at one of the paragraphs and hurriedly returned the newspaper. Her eyes flickered slightly. She knew that the article must have been written because of her, because George Rosen was originally praising Eric. Perhaps it was because of the coincidence last night that made Eric feel embarrassed, which caused this to happen. If she had clearly rejected him when he tried to strike up a conversation, perhaps this would not have happened. Nicole thought of this and felt even more guilty. She carefully asked, "Eric, this review won't affect the box office, right?" "No," Eric said. "Most of the film critics maintain an attitude of praise for this movie. It's fine if there are one or two critical articles occasionally, as long as the general direction of the movie's reputation is not affected." "Oh." Nicole breathed a sigh of relief. Eric carefully looked at the girl's expression. "Nicole, you seem to have something on your mind?" No. Nicole quickly shook her head and denied. Eric did not ask further. He hurriedly flipped through the rest of the newspaper and began to eat breakfast. However, George Rosen did not seem to intend to give up after publishing a critical film review. The next day, and the third day, several of his review articles appeared again, and the words were more and more intense. In the end, he even began to question whether the movie was made by Eric. George Rosen first listed some similarities between Eric's previous movies. After all, Back to 17, Home Alone, and Pretty Woman were all very heartwarming. Then, he changed the topic and made a detailed comparison between Home Alone and the dark and cold style of Dark War. In the end, he gave the readers the feeling that Dark War had nothing to do with the previous movies. Next, George Rosen began to comment on the similarities that existed in many of the movies made by the movie masters. From the beginning to the end, he instilled a point of view in the audience that if several movies were made by the same person, even those movie masters with varied styles could find many similarities in their works. However, Dark War did not. Therefore, George Rosen boldly implied that the movie was not made by Eric himself, but by a gunman hired by Columbia. This was completely a money-making work in the name of Eric Williams' genius director. The fans were fooled. Eric, who saw this article, shook his head helplessly. He deeply understood that the scariest thing was not to be afraid of, but the scariest thing was a cultured saying of wisdom. This was because the analysis of this article was too detailed. The professional standard was so high that Eric could only look up to it. As expected of a top student from an Ivy League school. Even Eric had to admit that the other party's analysis was very reasonable. Because the newspaper that published George Rosen's article was quite influential, the gunman point of view of Dark War had a considerable impact on the public. The battle for the box office during the summer was very fierce. Once there was a chance to attack the competitors, other film companies would definitely be very willing to add fuel to the fire. Therefore, in just a few days, the doubts in the media gradually increased. Columbia had to take this matter seriously and urgently contacted Eric to discuss countermeasures. "Perhaps we can sue the critic named George Rosen for defamation," said an executive in the conference room. The legal department manager shook his head and retorted, "We've already considered this method. It's very difficult to work. The federal court won't even accept our lawsuit request. George Rosen is too shrewd. His article is more like a professional thesis. From the beginning to the end, he did not explicitly say that Dark War was not shot by Eric. He has been hinting, and this hint is very convincing. To be honest, if I didn't happen to see the shooting process once, I would have believed this point of view. Now, the most important thing is to clarify. We can't let this point of view continue to fester. This is easy to say but not easy to do. You say, how do we clarify for Eric? Do we let the TV station broadcast Eric's scene live? We also found some news photos of the shooting process, but unfortunately, there are many photos of Cruise, Hanks, and even Brooke Shousey, but there are very few photos of Eric. It's not very convincing at all. Just when everyone was a little worried, Eric, who was delayed by something, pushed the door open and walked into the conference room, holding a cardboard box in his arms. "I'm sorry, everyone. I was delayed because I had to prepare these things." Eric apologized to everyone and found a place to sit down. Everyone involuntarily looked at the small box Eric put on the conference table. Eric noticed everyone's puzzled gazes and took the initiative to explain, "Oh, these are some videotapes. Drew, that little girl, went to the set several times to visit, and fiddled with the camera to shoot." Chapter 155. On July 10th, the box office for the first week of Dark War was officially released. Although George Rosen's article had caused a storm of doubt among the public, the reputation of Dark War itself was not affected much. More than 70% of the movie reviews were praising the movie. Therefore, Dark War still managed to earn more than $27 million in the three-day weekend box office in the first week under the pressure of Batman's continued popularity. Columbia had mixed feelings about this data. They were happy because the box office on weekdays during the summer would account for 40% to 50% of the total box office. The 7-day box office for Dark War still had a chance to hit $40 million in the first week. Although it would definitely not be able to catch up with Ghost Hunter 2's stunning first-week box office result because of Batman, this figure was enough to let the senior officials of Columbia, who had been worried about the box office for half a month, sleep well. If the box office reached $40 million in the first week, then the total box office still had a good chance of breaking $200 million. They were worried because of Ghost Hunter 2. Columbia was very worried that this movie would follow in the footsteps of Ghost Hunter 2 and drop more than 50% in the next week's box office. Although there would not be another blockbuster like Batman in the future, after experiencing the ups and downs of Ghost Hunter 2's box office curve, it was inevitable that Columbia would have such worries. Movies were like gambling, and no one knew what would happen next. Therefore, when the storm caused by George Rosen's questioning article had just arisen, Columbia quickly summoned all the executives to discuss countermeasures. The consequences of such a thing were unpredictable. Perhaps people would forget about it after reading it and chatting for a while. However, Columbia also found that it seemed that many parties did not want this argument to be easily ignored. In just a few days, many media outlets began to add fuel to the fire. They would never allow Dark War, which was originally going well, to be affected by this doubt. What's more, Columbia had already confirmed Eric's topic marketing suggestion. They would use the product placement in the movie and Eric's TV series as hype topics to push up the box office in the second week. However, if this plan was to be implemented smoothly, this wave of doubts had to be clarified first. Otherwise, it would be difficult for the topic marketing to achieve the expected effect. It was likely that the previous doubts would stack up and worsen the situation. Just as the executives were having a headache over how to clarify that Dark Warfare was not the work of a gunner, the small box of videotapes that Eric moved into the conference room made everyone's eyes light up. After playing a few videotapes, everyone quickly discussed a countermeasure. In the office building of the CBS TV station in Los Angeles, Eric was making the final preparations with a female host named Sophia Temple. They were going to record a show called Sophia's Talk Show. If they wanted to clarify the doubts as soon as possible, what could be more convincing than playing the videotapes on the set in front of millions of viewers on a talk show? When an executive suggested this, Eric first thought of the famous Oprah's talk show. After all, this show was too famous. Unfortunately, his idea was quickly dismissed because each season of Oprah's talk show was broadcast from September to May every year. It just so happened that this talk show was on hiatus. Moreover, even if Oprah's talk show was not on hiatus now, it was impossible to arrange the schedule in just a few days. Taking a step back, Columbia quickly arranged another show called Sophia's Talk Show through their good relationship with the CBS TV station. This talk show was obviously an imitation of Oprah's talk show, but unfortunately, Eric had never heard of it in his previous life. Sophia Temple was a very classy Caucasian woman. She wore a decent burgundy business suit. She had black hair, blue eyes, and a sharp nose. Eric felt that she looked similar to Courtney Cox from Friends in his previous life. It was just that she was more scholarly than Courtney Cox. After the exchange, Eric also understood why this talk show was unknown in his previous life. He guessed that this copycat show would not exist for long. As Sophia Temple's personality was very scholarly and her speech was very proper, Eric guessed that she must have come from a wealthy family and received a full set of elite education. Although this woman was very talented, her personality was somewhat conservative. Therefore, Eric felt that she was more suitable for more serious and high-end interview shows, such as interviewing entrepreneurs, scientists, and so on. She was not suitable for a talk show that required her to interact with guests and stir up the atmosphere of the audience. In comparison, Oprah, who came from a humble background, was different. In order to increase the influence of the show, she could expose her childhood experience of being raped by her family. She could do all sorts of funny things on the spot, and she could cry and laugh with the guests on the spot. However, Eric was certain that the conservative Sophia Temple would not be able to do that. "Miss Temple, Mr. Williams, the set is ready. You can start recording." A staff member pushed open the door and walked into the break room, speaking to Eric and Sophia, who were discussing the details. Eric and Sophia left the break room side by side and walked toward the studio. Speaking of directors, many people's first impression is definitely those old men with big beards, messy hair, and eccentric personalities. But since last year, there has been an exception in the circle of Hollywood directors. He is not only young and handsome, but also talented. What's more surprising is that this young man's movies have achieved jaw-dropping box office results. Oh, I think everyone already knows who he is. So, let's welcome our live guest today, Mr. Eric Williams. After a well-rehearsed opening speech, Sophia gestured for Eric to walk in again with a small box in his arms. The production team had suggested that the box containing the videotape be placed at the scene, but Eric had rejected them. The main purpose of appearing on this show was to clarify the rumors about the gunman. Of course, the deeper the impression he left on the audience, the better it would be for him to do so. Amidst the screams of the girls below the stage, Eric smiled and waved at the camera before sitting down with Sophia. "Eric, is this the gift you prepared for everyone? Do you want me to help distribute it to everyone?" Sophia smiled and pointed at the box that Eric was holding. Without waiting for Eric's reply, the girls below the stage screamed excitedly again. A few of them couldn't help but stand up and look at the things in the box. Eric pressed his hands together awkwardly, indicating for everyone to be quiet. He then explained, "I'm sorry, everyone. I came here in a hurry today and didn't have time to prepare a gift. As for these, they are just some videotapes. As for the content, I'll keep it a secret for now. I'll give everyone a surprise later." Although many people sighed in disappointment, they all quieted down. After that, Sophia and Eric began the standard process of a talk show interview. They got close to each other, reminisced about their childhood, looked back on the past, tasted the present, and looked forward to the future. Most of the questions were discussed in advance. In this aspect, Sophia was indeed more conservative, just like Eric's previous evaluation of her. Even if there were a few sudden small questions, Eric didn't find it difficult to deal with them at all. After talking about Eric's past for more than 10 minutes, the two of them began to change the topic to the main point of the interview. Eric, many people have said that compared to your previous movies, the style of Dark Battle has changed a little too much. What do you think of these people's comments? Eric stared at Sophia's pretty face and began to talk nonsense in a serious manner. Actually, to be honest, the appearance of my previous movies had a lot of accidental factors. At that time, my father suddenly passed away, and I had to drop out of school and work in a small restaurant, but that was not the life I wanted. I had been interested in movies since I was a child, so I wrote the script of Back to 17, which I prepared for myself because I wanted to enter Hollywood. Little Stu came to my house one night when I was shooting Back to 17. Little Stu asked me if he could shoot a movie too. I said yes, so Little Stu came to see me, and Little Stu came to my house one night when I was shooting Back to 17. Little Stu asked me if he could shoot a movie too. I said yes, so Little Stu came to see me. As for the script of Pretty Woman, there was also a great deal of chance involved in the creation of the script. Therefore, Dark Battle is a movie that I really want to film from the bottom of my heart. I had the idea of making this movie a long time ago. For this reason, I even sent an invitation to Mr. Tom Hanks before Wind and Moon was filmed. Oh, in that case, your previous movies were just for fun. If your words were heard by many Hollywood directors, many of them would be heartbroken. Sophia asked mischievously, and the audience burst into laughter once again. If Eric could really casually produce a few movies that had shocking box office sales, many directors who had been struggling in Hollywood for many years would probably hit their heads against the wall. Sophia's expression changed slightly. Eric quickly denied it with a smile. Of course not. I worked hard on every previous movie. I think that if a person wants to achieve something, it's very important. Even if you're not very interested in some things, you still have to work hard to do it well. Sophia nodded thoughtfully. Eric, although you're still so young, with your achievements, you definitely won't be restrained and restricted when making movies. Does this mean that your future movies will be in the style of Dark Battle? No, I prefer to try new things, so my future movies will definitely be varied. I don't want to be labeled as a certain kind of movie director at such a young age. But I've heard of a point of view in the past few days. No matter how good a movie master is, there will definitely be similar elements in their movies. But some newspaper analysis said that Dark Battle has nothing in common with your previous movies. It's like it was filmed by two different people. Sophia stared at Eric and brought up this sharp topic. The audience immediately held their breaths. In fact, many people had already guessed the reason why Eric came to this talk show, so they were very curious about how Eric would defend himself. Chapter 156. Actually, I can't do anything about this. My age is indeed a problem. There are very few directors under the age of 30 in Hollywood, not to mention that I'm not even 20 yet. Eric continued, originally, I didn't have to respond to this kind of question. After all, reality is the best weapon to counterattack. However, with the expansion of this point of view, I feel that even if I ignore the irresponsible media, I should give an explanation to the fans who have always supported my movie. Coincidentally, due to some coincidental factors, some footage of the filming process of Dark War was preserved. Here, it's these videotapes. As Eric spoke, he took out more than 10 videotapes from a small box and piled them between himself and Sophia. Wow, are these behind-the-scenes footage from the filming? Sophia asked. Eric shook his head. No, if they were behind-the-scenes footage, I definitely wouldn't appear on camera. These are some trivial things that I recorded on the set of Dark War with an extra camera. You mean, a documentary about the filming process of Dark War from a third party's point of view? Is this allowed in the film production process? Eric laughed. Under normal circumstances, this kind of situation is not allowed because the content of the movie needs to be kept absolutely confidential. However, the person who filmed these videotapes has a special identity. I believe that she won't reveal the content, so I let her do as she pleases. It's also because of my connivance that I now have the chance to prove my innocence." After Eric finished speaking, the audience below the stage craned their necks and widened their eyes. A few fans even softly urged Eric and Sophia to hurry up and play the contents of the video. "Alright, then everyone must be impatient. Let's take a look together." Sophia didn't overly whet the audience's appetite. She seemed to casually pick out a videotape and stuffed it into the projector that she had already prepared. Then, a shaky image appeared on the big screen behind the two of them. It seemed that the person operating the camera was not very familiar with it. After a while, the image slowly stabilized. At the same time, a girl's slightly rude voice sounded from outside the picture. "Alan, hold up the sound. If there's no sound when I film it, I'll settle the score with you." Another voice sounded with a hint of helplessness. "Yes, Your Highness." The audience laughed along. Many people could tell that the girl's voice should be from Drew Barrymore, who had a close relationship with Eric. Thinking of what Eric had just said, it was true that only this girl could act so recklessly on the set. If anyone else dared to act like this on a movie set, they would definitely be kicked out. On the big screen, the image began to move. Many people recognized that this should be a large studio. Looking at the full-scale model of the streets and houses on the screen, the audience let out a faint cry of surprise. After all, this was not the era of the internet more than 10 years later. Many things could be found on the internet. Although Americans often watched movies, they did not know much about the specific process of movie production. They had never seen a full-scale model of a large studio like this, so they were quite surprised. Accompanied by some noise, the person carrying the camera quickly walked into a room. In front of the camera, Eric, wearing a military green director's vest, appeared. In the image, Eric was gesticulating and explaining something to Hanks. Seeing the camera move closer, Eric stopped talking with Hanks and reached out with a smile. He seemed to have knocked on someone's head. At the same time, the girl's painful cry and the laughter of some people around her sounded. "Hey, girl, this professional Sony camera is worth $128,000. If you accidentally break it, I can only compensate you to Columbia to pay off the debt." Eric knocked on Drew's head and said. The camera shook briefly, and Drew's crazy voice sounded. "Wow, you're so annoying. How many times have I told you, don't knock my head?" Eric waved at the camera like he was shooing away kittens and puppies. "Go, go, go. Stand further away. We're about to start shooting." As the camera retreated, Eric's voice rang out, instructing the crew to start shooting. Many of the crew members in the camera began to move. Hanks and some other actors also began to take their positions. A script clerk walked forward, presumably to give the script board. At this point, Sophia pressed the stop button and explained to the audience, "Sorry, the next scene will involve the content of the movie, so we have to stop." Although it was only a short 1 or 2 minutes, the audience still enjoyed it. When Sophia stopped playing, many people sighed regretfully. "Eric, I'm starting to be more curious about a question. I believe the audience in front of the TV is also very curious about this question." Sophia did not immediately start playing the other videotapes. Instead, she asked the question that many people were wondering about. "Although it was only a short few minutes, we all saw that you doted on Miss Barrymore. You let her play with a camera worth more than $100,000 like a toy. What's your relationship with Drew?" Eric hesitated for a moment, organized his words, and said, "How should I put it? Drew and I met during the filming of Back to 17. Very quickly, I fell in love with this little girl." Seeing that some people were about to kick up a fuss, Eric quickly waved his hand and stopped them. "Don't misunderstand, it's definitely not the kind of love you think it is. I only see Drew as my sister." At that time, Drew had some bad habits. Although she went to rehab a few times, the effects were not very good. Her mother was helpless about it. "I couldn't bear to see a girl with such potential like Drew gradually sink into depression. Impulsively, I discussed with her mother and asked her to move in with me. Perhaps I could supervise her to get rid of these bad habits." After some consideration, Ms. Edick agreed, and that's what we're seeing now. Perhaps it's because Drew and I hit it off, but she still listens to me. Because of that, she has completely gotten rid of those bad habits. She's currently studying in an all-girls school. I hope that she can successfully graduate from high school. Once she's an adult, she'll be free to choose her own path. Eric didn't feel any psychological pressure towards this kind of nonsense. As someone in the entertainment industry, he already knew that these so-called interviews were a kind of show. As long as he could achieve his goal, it was fine. In his previous life, after celebrities went on interviews, it was not uncommon for them to show off their love, divorce, and all kinds of weird things to happen. If you treated this kind of program with a serious attitude, you'd be too stupid if your blood boiled or your eyes welled up with tears when you heard the celebrities talk about their inspirational stories or love experiences. Of course, although he didn't think much of it, Eric still put on a show. When he said these words, his expression was very sincere, and it was very provocative. It was as if he was an angel sent by God to save a lost girl. Sophia also revealed a touched expression. As for whether it was real or not, Eric didn't know. Then, let's look forward to Miss Barrymore's return to the big screen and bring us outstanding works. Now, let's see what the other videotapes talk about, Sophia said as she selected another videotape that she had ordered beforehand and placed it in the player. The camera was still a little shaky. This time, the setting wasn't a film studio, but a blocked street. There were many police cars parked around, and there were also many camera cranes and tracks. However, the staff in the video were chatting in groups of 3 to 5, some were drinking water with their heads raised, and some were leaning against the car door and fanning themselves with the folders in their hands. From the looks of it, the crew was taking a temporary break. The voiceover sounded again. "Hello everyone, I'm Drew Barrymore, a reporter from ABC Television. I heard that there was a bank robbery here. Let's interview the Commander-in-Chief, Mr. Eric Williams." The camera slowly moved closer to Eric, who was wearing sunglasses and a baseball cap not far away. The girl seemed to say something, and then a furry extra-large microphone unwillingly appeared in the camera. It slowly moved in front of Eric, and even accidentally poked Eric's nose. It looked very funny. An aggrieved male voice sounded. "Director, I was forced to do this. Don't blame me." Seeing this scene, Eric and Sophia laughed, and the audience at the scene roared with laughter. In the video, Eric took off his sunglasses and looked at the camera helplessly, as if saying, "What are you trying to do?" "Mr. Williams, I heard that there was a bank robbery here. What's the situation now? Can you tell us about it?" the girl asked in all seriousness. "All right." Eric pushed the microphone away from his face and said lazily, "We have the situation under control. Miss Reporter, look, the 2 robbers are playing poker with the special forces. The atmosphere is peaceful. The negotiator, Hanks, isn't really chatting with the plainclothes man. He's actually probing the other party. We've already learned that the plainclothes man is a mole, and we're going to arrest him later. The director, Mr. Joe Pacey, has something urgent to attend to and will only be back in an hour. I'm sure the hostages will still be alive by then." Eric's funny words made the audience roar with laughter again. After playing this segment, Sophia smiled and picked a few more videotapes to play for a short while. During this time, she also mixed in the conversation between the 2 of them and the live audience. Unknowingly, because some scenes needed to be recorded multiple times, the 40-minute talk show took more than 2 hours to finish recording. Chapter 157. On Wednesday, a new episode of Sophia's Talk Show was officially broadcast on CBS. The guest for this episode was supposed to be a famous football player, but when many football fans sat in front of the TV waiting for their idol to appear, they found that the guest had been changed to the young director Eric Williams. As a result, some die-hard fans called the TV station to ask questions. However, most of the TV viewers were not that picky. Instead, they were pleasantly surprised. After all, Eric's current influence was not something a football player could compare to. "Wow, I didn't expect a gunfight to be filmed like this. It's so cool. Eric Williams's cold joke is hilarious. The robbers are playing poker with the SWAT team members, haha. Why hasn't Drew Barrymore appeared yet? Ever since Back to 17, there has been no news of her in the media. Eric is so scary when he's angry. He doesn't look like such a person at all. There's nothing strange about that. He's so young. If he wants those older employees to listen to him, how can he not be fierce? All kinds of discussions appeared in front of thousands of televisions. Due to the summer holidays, the proportion of young people in front of the TV had greatly increased. Eric's influence among young people was probably higher than the average idol star. After all, as peers, if you were 100 meters taller than others, you might attract all kinds of envy and jealousy. However, if you were 10,000 meters taller than others, most of the people would worship you. Therefore, when many young people saw Eric appear on TV, they couldn't help but share their emotions and call their classmates to remind them to watch the show. The influence of Sophia's talk show was far from Oprah's talk show. Although the latter had only been around for a few years, it had an average of more than 11 million viewers per episode. Sophia's talk show, which followed the trend, only had an average of about 4 million viewers. At the beginning of this episode, the original viewership figures were only 4.2 million. However, as the show was broadcasted, the viewership curve continued to soar. After the 40-minute broadcast, the viewership figures had stopped at 7.5 million. It had almost doubled. After the show was over, the CBS TV station's hotline was bombarded with calls. If we could do the promotion a week in advance, the show's ratings would definitely exceed 10 million, a CBS executive said with some regret after seeing the rating statistics. More than 70% of the calls to the hotline were for CBS to rebroadcast the show as soon as possible, while 30% of the calls were for random reasons. Some hoped that the cast of Dark War could appear on the show together, while others hoped to see Drew and Eric appear on the screen together. There was also a large number of people asking if the video in Eric's hands would be released to the market. CBS compiled the audience's feedback into a document and forwarded it to Columbia and Firefly. At the same time, they also extended invitations to Eric, Drew, and the actors of Dark War. Although Columbia was very tempted, Eric and the others refused. If it weren't for the sake of clarifying the rumors, Eric would have appeared on the talk show. Eric refused, and Drew certainly wouldn't go. The agents of Cruz and Hanks both felt that the show's influence was too small, and it didn't match the identities of the two superstars. However, Brooke Shousey was somewhat tempted. Dark War brought a very good turning point for her career. However, CBS, which was rejected by Eric and the two Toms at the same time, was not interested. The other big names didn't want to appear, and they only invited the actresses. After all, Brooke Shousey only appeared in Dark War for a few minutes. Although the influence of Sophia's talk show was far less than The Oprah Show, CBS was still a national TV station. They weren't so desperate that they couldn't be choosy. Although the invitation was rejected, after CBS communicated with various parties, they quickly came up with a way to maximize their profits. When Eric participated in the recording of the show, he had accumulated more than 2 hours of material, while the talk show was only 40 minutes. Therefore, CBS re-edited the 2 hours of material into 2 episodes, which were broadcast over the next 2 days. Because they deliberately did a short promotion during the primetime slot at night, the re-edit first episode reached 9 million viewers the next day. When the second episode was broadcast on Friday, the viewership directly rushed to 10 million viewers. At its peak, it even reached 12 million viewers. When a daytime show's viewership reached 10 million, it could be treated as an ace show. The Oprah Show had achieved glory for more than 2 decades because of this average score. In order to preserve their results, CBS directly gave up on several episodes that had already been produced. They spent a lot of money to invite other more important guests in an attempt to create a talk show comparable to The Oprah Show. But in the end, they could only be disappointed. Just as Eric had predicted, the show's biggest problem was the host, Sophia Temple. It was not that she was not good enough, but that Sophia Temple's personality was not suitable to host a talk show. Therefore, after the second week, the talk show's viewership experienced a miraculous peak. Although they changed to more important guests, the viewership slowly declined. In the end, CBS could only give up. The episodes that Eric had participated in became the talk show's insurmountable peak. Until the show was axed by CBS and Sophia Temple moved to behind the scenes, the viewership ratings never reached that high again. Of course, this was all in the future. After the CBS talk show aired, the doubts about the gunman in Dark War quickly disappeared. After all, after the talk show aired, especially in the later episodes, the show aired more than 20 minutes of behind-the-scenes footage. From Eric's setting up of the set, to explaining the scenes to the actors, to the detailed filming process, everything was shown to the audience. And from time to time, the blockades of the streets told everyone that the videotape could not be faked. Therefore, if anyone raised such doubts again, it was purely a test of the audience's intelligence. After Sophia's talk show aired, George Rosen did not appear again. This was because Columbia Pictures directly pressured Premiere Magazine, forcing them to fire him. After all, because of George Rosen's article, Columbia had almost suffered immeasurable losses. If Columbia did not do anything, it would seem too easy to bully. Although the other major film companies secretly applauded George Rosen's article that caused trouble for Columbia, they did not want this to happen to them in the future. Therefore, as a film critic, George Rosen was also blacklisted by the 6 major film companies. Chapter 158. In this era, the income of film critics mainly came from 2 sources: public relations fees from film companies and royalties from newspaper and magazine publications. Of course, the top film critics also had other sources of income, such as publishing books or appearing on TV shows. George Rosen was obviously not the top. Otherwise, Premiere Magazine would not have fired George Rosen so easily after being pressured by Columbia. Because of the blacklist, when a new film was about to be released, George Rosen not only did not receive a cent of public relations fees, but also could not receive an invitation to a test screening or a premiere. Not being able to attend a test screening or a premiere meant that it was impossible to get first-hand viewing information that was ahead of ordinary audiences. Newspapers and magazines were not very enthusiastic about the reviews of movies that had already been released, so even the income from movie reviews was greatly reduced. The loss of income from these 2 aspects was more than 80% of the original income. Therefore, being blacklisted by the 6 major film companies meant that George Rosen could no longer stay in the film critic circle, and the fame that he had spent years building in the circle would disappear. In fact, as a veteran in the circle for many years, George Rosen was also clear about the rules of the game in the circle. There were many lines that could not be touched, so he had never done anything out of line before. After years of hard work, he also had a considerable reputation in the industry, and his annual income even reached an enviable 6-figure sum. Perhaps it was precisely because of his success over the years that George Rosen became a little self-righteous and forgot his duty. That was why he published several articles attacking Dark War in a row. Originally, he felt that he had been teased by Nicole and wanted to vent his anger and take a little revenge on her. However, he did not expect that he had underestimated the influence of that professional article. By the time he realized it, it was already too late, and he had directly ruined his career. After the first week, perhaps because of the controversy, or perhaps because of the publicity effect of Eric's appearance on Sophia's talk show, Dark War earned more than 16 million yuan in the box office within 4 working days of the first week. The total box office for the first week reached more than 43 million yuan, which was at least 3 million more than Columbia's estimate of the box office for the first weekend. This data made Columbia very confident. At the same time, with the clarification of the gunman's doubts, the topical marketing plan that had been discussed in advance began. The incident began with several entertainment newspapers fiercely attacking the product placement in Dark War. More than 30 product placements. Are we really watching a movie? We're not watching a secret battle, but an advertising battle in the Twin Soups advertisement blockbuster. Eric Williams's product placement is a road of no return. A series of eye-catching headlines directly pushed the topic of Dark Battle to the forefront. The media was in an uproar again after the controversy. Columbia also began to manipulate the direction of public opinion before other competitors could react, turning most of the media's comments into a ridiculing tone. Soon, the Los Angeles Times published an audience survey report. The survey was done by Columbia in advance, and the target audience was those who had just come out of the Dark War theater. The content was about the audience's views on the advertisements in Dark War. In the random sample of 1,000 people, 76% of the audience did not feel the existence of advertisements in the movie. 15% felt the existence of advertisements but did not care much. 7% of the audience said that they were somewhat concerned about the advertisements, and only 2% chose to hate the advertisements. In order to ensure its credibility, the Los Angeles Times published a stack of photos of the random sample report on the front page. This report almost set the tone for the Dark War product placement incident. Whenever this incident was mentioned, many people would feel that most people did not even feel the existence of advertisements. In fact, this was not a big deal. Coupled with the publication of other articles by Columbia, the public's direction of thinking began to change. Then, Columbia began to clarify that there were indeed some product placements in the movie, but it was not as exaggerated as the irresponsible media said. Columbia also brought up the controversy that had just happened, saying that it was a malicious accusation against Dark War by competitors. As the public opinion continued to guide the public, more and more people began to be curious about the advertisements in Dark War. This was because, as the survey showed, a large number of people did not even realize the existence of advertisements in Dark War when they watched it for the first time. When Columbia's competitors reacted and began to manipulate their own media to reverse the direction of public opinion and lead the public to hate the product placements in Dark War, Columbia threw out another bombshell. On the second weekend of the movie's release, early on Saturday morning, the Los Angeles Times, the New York Times, the Washington Post, and several other newspapers published a statement from Columbia. Although according to the survey, the product placements in Dark War did not affect the viewing experience of the majority of movie fans, in order to thank the fans for their support, after communication with the film's production and distribution parties, we have decided to return the $2 million in product placements received from Dark War to the majority of movie fans. From the date of the release of this statement, the audience can send all 12 product placements in the form of letters to the following address. We will select 200 lucky audience members who are correct during the live broadcast, and each person will be awarded $10,000 in cash. Then, the statement included the mailing address, deadline, and restrictions such as the limit of 1 letter per citizen ID and repeated deliveries were invalid. In an instant, the entire American media was in an uproar again. Even many audience members could not help but realize that this was blatant hype. However, even if they realized this, it could not stop the enthusiasm of many audience members. After all, it was the end of the 80s. For many American families, $10,000 was a huge sum of money. Anyway, everyone had the habit of watching movies during the holidays. If they could spend a few cents to get an envelope and send out their guesses after watching the movie, they might be able to win a grand prize of $10,000. Why not? Moreover, the probability of 200 people winning the prize seemed quite high. On the second day of the announcement, many cinemas that showed Dark War were full. On the day of the announcement, Dark War received $13 million at the box office. The Sunday box office also reached $11 million. In addition to the $8 million box office on Friday, Dark War had a total box office of $32 million for the second weekend. Miraculously, it achieved a 20% reverse drop in the box office during the intense summer season. It was also the only movie that had a reverse drop in the box office during the summer season. After 7 days of the second week, Dark War once again received more than $49 million at the box office for the second week. The total box office had reached $92 million. In comparison, the box office of Ghostbusters 2, which had begun to weaken after 5 weeks, had only received a little more than $90 million at the box office. Batman, affected by the popularity of Dark War, dropped 44% again in the fourth week and only received $16 million at the box office. Although the cumulative box office had reached $168 million, if Batman suffered another 40% drop in the box office in the following weeks, the box office could only remain within the tens of millions. Based on the box office trend of Dark War, the weekly box office figures of tens of millions could be maintained for another 3 to 4 weeks. It was really hard to say who would be the box office champion of the summer season. This result made many film companies a little dumbfounded. Even many executives of Columbia Pictures felt a sense of emptiness. Columbia's stock rose rapidly again, and the total market value exceeded $4.5 billion within a few weeks. Sony, which had reached a preliminary acquisition agreement, became anxious. The original plan was to complete the acquisition at the end of September, but the person in charge of Sony made several requests, hoping to sign the final agreement in August. The other party also realized that if Dark War overtook Batman and became the box office champion of the summer season, the stock price would definitely not stop rising. In the third week, the box office of Dark War fell by 26% again, taking more than $38 million at the box office. The confused media could only attribute this trend to the public's desire for windfall profits. Although many film companies wanted to learn from Columbia's lucky draw method to promote their films, unfortunately, the summer release trend had ended. Dark War could be said to be the last batch of big-budget films to be released, and there was not much point in promoting the films released before it. As for the movies that were released after Dark War, they basically took advantage of the end of the summer to enter the market to make money. Therefore, the other movie companies did not dare to spend 2 million yuan. Even if it was 1 million yuan, very few people would be willing to spend it. After all, the risk was too great. Even if a movie received 100 million yuan at the box office, after the theatrical distribution split, the remaining half would still need to be divided among the investors, producers, and distributors. In the end, they would have to pay taxes. The profit would usually be in the millions. There was no one else in the industry like Eric who could get hundreds of millions of yuan from Home Alone. Even for the Star Wars series, which was widely recognized as the most profitable at the moment, Lucas couldn't get such a high profit just from the box office. Columbia's use of product placement to achieve a reversal in the box office was destined to be a classic marketing example, and it would be studied by the major film companies. Eric was not worried that this method would be copied by others. This was because this operation was completely unconventional. To put it bluntly, it was fine if it was done once or twice. The audience would still feel that product placement was quite fresh. But once it was used a few times, the audience would have the reverse psychology of, I am here to watch the movie for entertainment, not to count the product placement. It would be counterproductive if it was used again. Chapter 159. Eric, do you think I'm right? In the study room, Drew was curled up in a large office chair, writing and drawing. He held a notebook full of advertising names and approached Eric. Eric looked away from the monitor and shook his head. No, why are you writing this? Do you want to participate in the lucky draw too? Can't I? That's $10,000. Drew put away the notebook and thought for a while with a pen under his chin. He lowered his head and changed it. What about this time? Oh, that's not right. Eric looked at it again and dug through the pile of documents on the desk in front of him. He found a few pieces of paper and handed it to the girl. Take it, don't bother me anymore. I don't want to. I want to guess everything with my own ability. Drew glanced at it and immediately refused. At the same time, he dragged his legs on the floor and moved his chair a little further away, as if being too close to the paper would tarnish his character. Eric shrugged and looked at the text on the monitor again. He typed on the keyboard and said, Then can you not ask me? This doesn't count as your own ability. Of course it counts. You're also a kind of personal ability. Drew said and changed it a few more times. Eric couldn't help but point out the biggest mistake. Hey, the TV scenes don't count as product placement. Just change it to a Canon camera. Wow, how can you do that? I want to guess a few more times. The girl pouted and hit Eric angrily. Only then did she unwillingly correct the mistake that she hadn't discovered. She had always felt that the scenes in Friends could be considered as product placement. In fact, many people had the same idea. Because Friends was also a part of the hype, many movie fans, like Drew, naturally treated Friends as a product placement. Columbia didn't make a clear statement about this and let the public speculate. After calming down for a while, the girl leaned on his back again. This made Eric a little restless. Drew, stop messing around. If you don't want to sit in the office chair, give it to me. It's not comfortable to sit on the chair. Eric shook his shoulders to get rid of the girl. Drew didn't let go. Eric, I thought of another good idea to make money. Why are you suddenly interested in making money recently? Eric pulled the girl's arm down. I'm jealous. Drew followed Eric's big hand and moved away from Eric's back. Then she sat on Eric's lap. What's there to be jealous of? Eric comforted her. He knew that the girl was stimulated by his two movies, Home Alone and Pretty Woman. But the truth was not like the media's bragging that Eric already had $200 million in cash. Although the share of Home Alone had been transferred to Eric's account in early July, after repaying the bank's two loans of $50 million, Eric only had $20 million left. This money would definitely have to be shared with the actors of Home Alone. But if you want to make a profit, you have to get the consent of everyone in the videotape. Otherwise, you'll be sued in the future. Even if you make $100 million, it won't be enough to pay for it. If you want to get the consent of so many people, it's more complicated than shooting a big-budget movie. Wow, it's so complicated. Forget it. The girl lowered her head in disappointment. Eric patted the girl's back gently and said, "Okay, don't be depressed. Making money is mainly a man's business. You just have to dress up. It's late now. Go back to sleep early. Let me write the script quietly for a while. But I want to make money. There's still so much time left in the summer vacation. It's very boring. Eric, how about you let me take on a movie? I'll become stupid if I don't do anything." Drew snuggled up to Eric. Okay, let me think about it." Eric rubbed his temples and glanced at the script of Sleepless in Seattle on the table. He suddenly remembered something. Chapter 160. It should be a conversation with a friend in his previous life. At that time, a movie called Beijing Meets Seattle was released. The two of them casually talked about the movie. Finally, they began to trace back. Finally, they found that many movies, such as Grey Garden, Sleepless in Seattle, Love Story, were inspired by the famous Golden Jade League by Cary Grant and Deborah Cole. Of course, this was not the point. What Eric thought of was that the friend also accidentally mentioned that it seemed that because of the popularity of Sleepless in Seattle, the videotape of Golden Jade League became popular. 2 million boxes were sold in a short time. This was an unexpected windfall for the film company that owned the copyright. Golden Jade League was an old movie 40 years ago. Although the two leading actors were Hollywood superstars at the time, it had been so long. Moreover, this movie was not like 007 and other movies that could be shot infinitely, so it had little commercial value. Perhaps 1 or 2 million yuan could buy all the copyrights of this movie. Moreover, Eric considered that he would film Sleepless in Seattle in the future, so he must obtain some authorization from the copyright holder of Golden Jade League. After the other party learned about this, it was difficult to guarantee that they would not raise the price. It was better to buy all the copyrights now. Seeing Eric's slightly excited expression when he thought of something, the girl couldn't bear it and hurriedly asked, "Eric, is there any good movie suitable for me? Tell me quickly." "There is no movie, but if you want to make a sum of money, there is a good opportunity." Eric picked up a pen and wrote down the name of the movie Golden Jade League on the paper. "Do you know this movie?" Drew looked at it with his eyes wide open and shook his head honestly. "I don't know." Eric could only explain patiently, "Then you remember that I told you about my next movie, right?" The girl pouted her lips towards Nicole's room outside the study. "Of course. In the setting of that movie, the heroine and likes to watch Golden Jade League very much. I think that if Sleepless in Seattle is released, the videotape sales of Golden Jade League will definitely increase greatly. So, if you want to make money, you can use your vacation time to find a way to buy all the copyrights of this movie. This is an old movie from 40 years ago. As long as the price is right, the movie company will definitely be willing to sell it." Drew had a kind of blind trust in Eric. If Eric said this to others, the other party would definitely be suspicious. However, Drew did not have this kind of doubt. Instead, he asked, "But, if I buy it, where can I release the video?" Firefly will start to establish its own distribution channels in the near future, including videotape channels, Eric said. At the same time, he thought of Home Alone and the 3 movie contracts signed with Fox. He had a trace of helplessness and regret. At that time, he was alone and inexperienced, so he did not consider many things too thoroughly. Therefore, when he signed the agreement, he handed over the film and television rights to Fox. Firefly could only wait for a share of the profits. Although it seemed good, after all, many independent film companies did not even have the right to get a share of the profits. Usually, they were bought out at a fixed price, and he could still enjoy a share of the profits. But compared to releasing it himself, giving the distribution rights to Fox was still tantamount to losing a lot of income. After all, after going through the release process, the fame and reputation of the movie had been established. If he could have his own videotape distribution channel, then even if it was not as comprehensive as a big company, the profits he could get were still much more than the share if a big piece of the cake was cut off by the giants. Moreover, through his understanding during this period of time, he found that small companies with distribution ability, even if they handed over the distribution rights of their own movies to the movie giants, usually would not transfer the peripheral rights such as videotapes. As the proportion of the peripheral income of movies to the total income of movies increased, the income from these peripheral rights was likely to be an important source of funds to support a second and third tier film company. For those second and third tier film companies, if they had good film and television resources in their library, the peripheral income they received every year could support the daily operations of the film company. They did not have to repeatedly draw funds from box office earnings or investors. As long as there was no huge investment loss, these film companies could continue to survive. Therefore, Eric was also eager to establish his own distribution channel as soon as possible. The next 3 movies, Island Horror, Smell a Woman, Steel Magnolias, and the peripheral rights of Friends, would definitely not be given away. "But, Eric, I don't have money." Drew blinked her eyes and looked at Eric like a fairy. Eric could not help but pinch the girl's face. "Don't you have a card? Just use it. If you make money, it's on you." Eric paused and remembered that Westerners did not have a dowry. He could only change his words. "If you make money, it's on you. If you lose money, it's on me. Then I'll do it." Drew rubbed her face against Eric's face. Her small mouth was about to bite Eric's lips, but she was still blocked by a big hand. So she stuck out her tongue and licked Eric's palm. "You must be a cat in your previous life. You like to lick people's palms so much." Eric got the girl off his lap. "Okay, now that we have something to do and money to make, we can go to sleep." "Eric, you haven't hugged me to sleep in a long time," the girl said with a bitter face. "I'm a law-abiding citizen." Eric reached out and pushed the girl in the direction of the door. "And there are outsiders here." When Drew heard the word outsiders, she seemed to be very happy. She pounced on Eric and kissed him on the cheek before leaving. Eric looked at the closed study door and shook his head with a smile. He turned his attention to the monitor and began to finish the script of Friends. Barry Diller personally called Eric to pay attention to the filming progress of Friends. Although American TV series were broadcast while filming, and Friends was no exception, it was almost August now, and the TV series would start airing in September. Eric only had a month left. "Eric, this is today's newspaper." Early the next morning, Eric returned to the living room after his routine exercise. Nicole thoughtfully placed the newspaper on the coffee table in front of Eric. "Thank you, Nicole." Eric admired the girl's new pink uniform with great interest before picking up the newspaper to read. Nicole went back to the kitchen again. A moment later, Eric saw the name of a movie in the newspaper. This movie happened to be released by Columbia. He didn't expect it to do well. Moreover, the name was When Harry Met Sally. The lead actors were Billy Crystal, who had hosted multiple Oscars, and Meg Ryan, the original female lead of Sleepless in Seattle. Eric still likes this actress with a sweet smile. However, it seems that the other party's path to stardom is very bumpy. To sum it up, perhaps it can be said that this sweetheart's choice of films is very poor. It seems that her two more successful films are with Tom Hanks. One is Sleepless in Seattle. The other is Electronic Love Letter, a few years later. Other than that, there are no outstanding works. The reason why she said she had bad taste was because this sweetheart had brushed past a series of blockbuster movies, which seemed very magical. Since the 1990s, she had turned down Pretty Woman, Ghost, and even Basic Instinct, which made the unknown Sharon Stone soar into the sky. The reason was, of course, that she refused to take off her clothes. But after this sweetheart came to the new era, she took off her clothes without any scruples in order to change her style. She even wanted to imitate the success of Basic Instinct, and participated in a movie of the same genre, Naked Cut. Unfortunately, this movie was not as lucky as Basic Instinct, and went directly to Java. Looking at the box office data of When Harry Met Sally in the newspaper, it was estimated that this sweetheart would be a little popular. Because of Eric, Hollywood's history had deviated greatly. He didn't know if this sweetheart would be as unlucky as before in this time and space. Nicole, can you come over? Eric looked at When Harry Met Sally in the newspaper, but he remembered her image in Sleepless in Seattle, so he called the girl who was busy in the kitchen. What's the matter? Nicole quickly came out with a small spatula in her hand. Forget it, you do what you need to do first. We'll talk after breakfast. Oh. The girl inexplicably turned around and walked back. At the dining table, Drew finished her breakfast and took out a tissue to wipe her mouth. She hurriedly got up and wanted to go out. Come back, sit down, and finish the milk. Eric pointed to the half-empty glass of milk and glared at the girl. Are you in a hurry to go back to Mars? The girl reluctantly sat back in the chair and explained, I'm going to find someone to buy the copyright of that movie. Finish your breakfast first, Eric repeated, ignoring Drew's explanation. Humph. The girl sniffled, raised her head, and drank a few mouthfuls of milk. Is this okay? Okay, go crazy. You're so annoying. Drew took another tissue, wiped her mouth, and walked out. When she came to the door of the dining room, she suddenly turned around and glared at Nicole. Then, she turned her gaze to Eric. When I'm not at home, you're not allowed to mess around. Chapter 161. Eric, did you want to tell me something? Nicole returned to the living room after washing the tableware and found that Eric didn't go to the company as usual. Instead, he was still sitting in the living room reading the newspaper. The girl was smart enough to realize that he was waiting for her. Eric gestured for the girl to sit opposite him and said, Sleepless in Seattle is expected to start shooting in early September, and I happen to have some free time recently, so I think we should talk about the movie. The girl just nodded and looked at Eric, waiting for him to continue. It's been 2 months. I think you've already memorized the script of Sleepless in Seattle. Tell me about your understanding of the female lead first. Eric put the newspaper back on the coffee table, crossed his legs, and looked at Nicole. He asked a question that was usually asked during an actor's interview. Nicole had indeed memorized her lines in Sleepless in Seattle in the past 2 months. Hearing Eric's question, the girl only thought for a moment before replying, I think that Anne's biggest characteristic is that she is a very emotional woman. This is the main reason why this story can happen. She only heard about the male lead's deeds on the radio and flew to Seattle alone. Just to see Sam, and just for a beautiful fantasy caused by a movie, she resolutely broke up with her engaged boyfriend and ran to the top floor of the Empire State Building. It sounds like you don't like the female lead very much? Eric asked with a smile. The girl pursed her thin lips. As a very smart and rational woman, if Nicole really met a woman like Anne Reid in reality, she would only snort. But the girl was also very smart. She didn't directly answer Eric's question, but said more tactfully, this doesn't prevent me from playing this role well. Eric shrugged and pushed the newspaper about When Harry Met Sally that he had seen before over. Look at this first. I saw a female star more suitable for the female lead of Sleepless in Seattle than you. Her name is Meg Ryan." The girl's delicate hand, which was originally placed on the small apron, trembled slightly. She raised her eyes and carefully observed Eric's expression, but did not find any useful information. He could only nervously take the newspaper and quickly read the promotional article about When Harry Met Sally. Eric explained, "The movie's results are good, so the box office appeal of Meg Ryan, who was originally not very famous, will definitely increase greatly. If we can invite her to play the female lead, Sleepless in Seattle, we'll be able to take over When Harry Met Sally in the new year, which will also be of great benefit to the box office." I've already signed the contract." The girl was not confident and weakly defended herself. "Of course, I didn't say that I'm going to replace you. I'm just telling you a possibility." Eric said, "If your performance does not satisfy me, our contract clearly states that I have the right to replace the female lead midway. However, I believe that you have the potential, which is why I'm giving you a chance." In his memory, Nicole had indeed played such a sweet and innocent character before. It was in the 2005 movie Home with a Fairy Wife, in his previous life. The girl's portrayal of the sweet witch Isabel in the movie was very successful, completely subverting her previous sexy and glamorous image on screen. However, the movie's plot was too flawed, and there were no highlights. In the end, it led to the movie's failure. Moreover, the male lead, Will Fafner's acting skills were also greatly suppressed by Nicole. He probably did not steal the limelight of the cool Tom Cruise's manager who occasionally appeared beside him. Many people thought that the role was deliberately used by the producers to stir up discussion. After all, Tom Cruise did indeed play the role of a manager in Mr. Sweetheart, although it was a sports manager. "Thank you." The girl heard Eric's last words and sighed slightly in relief. "All right, let's talk about something else. You've already been at my house for more than 2 months. It's time for you to leave." Isn't there still a month before filming starts?" The girl raised her head. Although there was no reluctance in her expression, there was still some uneasiness. This was because she knew that the only reason she could get this role was because she had to work as Eric's maid for a period of time. Now that there was only a month left, he was asking her to leave. The girl couldn't help but feel as if she had bought something from a convenience store without paying enough money. If she didn't pay enough money, the boss had the right to ask for the goods back. Eric didn't quite understand why the girl felt uneasy, but he still patiently explained, "Starting next month, Sleepless in Seattle will officially begin preparations. Some information will also be slowly revealed to the public, such as the male and female leads. When the time comes, the media will definitely be very curious about who you are. In order to promote, you will definitely have to show your face from time to time. It won't be appropriate for you to continue living at my place." The girl nodded. "I understand. Then, I'll move out today? Don't be too anxious. I'll get someone to find you a house first. There's one more thing that's very important. After you move out, take some time to watch When Harry Met Sally a few more times. I hope you can figure out Meg Ryan's acting style. My ideal and is similar to her image in this movie. Do you want me to imitate her?" The girl leaned forward slightly and asked carefully. Eric gestured with his hands and said, "No, it's not an imitation, and you won't be able to imitate it. The difference between the two of you is like heaven and earth." Meg Ryan is the standard kind of actress who is sweet, and her acting career will be restricted for a very long time. If you imitate too much, you'll definitely be labeled as a sweet actress in the future, which won't be good for your future development. What I want you to figure out is the kind that Meg Ryan's every move is, the kind that, well, to put it bluntly, it's some silly little actions and small details. If she could successfully enter Hollywood, Nicole didn't mind being labeled. In Hollywood, a sweet actress was much better than a vase. However, she could also hear that Eric was thinking about her future, so she nodded obediently. After chatting for a while, Eric stood up and put on his jacket. "Then, find some time to pack your luggage and move out immediately after you find a house. I'm going to the company." Nicole also stood up quickly and smiled at Eric, wanting to send the man out. Eric saw the girl's rare smile and couldn't help but stop. "Nicole, smile again for me to see." The girl was a little confused, but she obediently smiled. It was a little more exaggerated than before, revealing 2 little rabbit teeth. Eric shook his head in disappointment. "Forget it, don't smile like that. It feels like you're planning to do something bad. It's not bad to smile like just now. Practice more." "I will." The girl walked Eric out the door before returning to the villa. She habitually did a routine cleaning. 2 hours later, the girl, who had finished everything, sat on the sofa in the living room, looking around blankly. "Eric, this is the information you asked for about the 2 film companies, New Line and Mira Mike." In Firefly's office, Eric's assistant, Alan, placed 2 folders in front of Eric. "Put them here first. Contact the Robert Shea brothers from New Line and Wayne Stan from Mira Mike. When are they free? I want to have a meal with them. As for the purpose, there's no need to hide it. Just reveal it to them." Eric lowered his head and wrote something as he instructed. Alan wrote down Eric's instructions in the memo and looked up. "Eric, is there anything else?" "Well, wait a minute." Eric continued to write with his head down. After a while, he handed the note to Alan. "There are 2 more things. The first is to rent an apartment in Beverly Hills. It's not too expensive, the kind that doesn't cost more than $5,000 a month. The second is to register a shell film company in my name according to the name on the note. I have a use for it." Alan looked at the note and read it. "Flower Films?" "Yes." Eric nodded and didn't explain anything. "Go and do it. The apartment needs to be rented quickly. It's best if you can rent it in 2 days." "I'll be careful. But does the apartment rent go through the company's account?" "No, it's personal. Just find a house and get the real estate agent to prepare the contract." Alan pasted the note on his memo booklet and confirmed a few things with Eric before leaving Eric's office. After the office door closed, Eric opened the information of the 2 companies. Although he was going to establish a distribution channel for Firefly in the near future, Eric didn't want to start from scratch. The most important thing was that he was very tight on time. Therefore, acquiring a film company with a distribution channel was the most convenient and fast way. In his memory, the 2 film companies with great potential that Eric could think of were New Line and Mira Mike. As for Lionsgate, which was about to become a movie giant in the new era, it hadn't appeared yet. Orion, United Artists, Samsung, and other film companies were also closely related to the Big Six. There was no possibility of them being acquired by him. Even if he intended to buy at a high price, the Big Six wouldn't easily let go of him knowing that he wanted to be independent. Although there were many second- and third-tier film companies in this era that were as famous as New Line and Mira Mike, Eric hadn't heard of them in his previous life. He estimated that those companies had either completely lost their independence after being acquired or went bankrupt due to poor management or failed investments. Chapter 162. After carefully reading the information of the 2 companies, Eric discovered that New Line Entertainment was far more powerful than Mira Mike, perhaps because it had been established more than 10 years ago. The simplest evidence was in terms of distribution ability. As a second-tier film company, New Line Entertainment could already distribute nearly 1,500 screens for a movie. However, Mira Mike was still in the stage of small scale. At most, it could only distribute 400 to 500 screens for its own movies. Moreover, when Mira Mike was established, the New Line had already started its independent production business. Now, it even owned the very profitable A Nightmare on Elm Street series, but Mira Mike was still in the stage of buying films all over the world to distribute. Seeing this, Eric couldn't help but pat the table lightly. He suddenly remembered that he had missed something. It was about Steven Soderbergh's film, Sex, Lies, Videotape. Soderbergh used this film to become the youngest Palme d'Or winner at the Cannes Film Festival a few months ago. Back then, Eric reminded him to buy the North American copyright of this movie, but because he was so busy filming Dark War, he forgot about it. If history had not deviated, this movie would have definitely been won by the Wayne-Stan brothers. In his memory, Mike Mira had relied on the movie Sex, Lies videotape to make a name for herself. After making a small fortune, she had enough capital to enter the field of independent production. She slowly figured out her own way of survival and began to flourish from then on. It was already late July. Eric only knew that Sex, Lies videotape had won the Palme d'Or at the Cannes Film Festival in May. However, he had yet to discover any news about the movie being released in North America. If Mike Mira really got the distribution rights of this movie, then if he wanted to acquire Mike Mira, it would be best to reach an agreement before the movie was released. Otherwise, once Sex, Lies videotape did well at the box office, even if Wayne-Stan Mira still agreed to be acquired, Eric would definitely have to pay a higher price. This was the rule in the industry. A movie could greatly increase the market value of a company. Pixar was originally worth $50 million, but because of the success of Toy Story, its market value increased 20 times in a short time. In Eric's vision, it would be best to acquire these two companies at the same time. This way, he could develop both commercial and indie films at the same time. With the classic Oscar-winning movies in Eric's memory, even if Mike Mira went down the path of releasing indie films again, it would definitely not earn less than a company that focused on commercial films. According to the information, the estimated market value of New Line Cinema was about $150 million. This was because they were an old company that had been in business for 20 years. Not only did they have a large film library, but they also had the very valuable rights to the A Nightmare on Elm Street series. This series of movies had started in 1984, and they had to film one movie every year. As a low-budget horror movie, almost every movie made money. Although the box office would not be very high, it was good for a long time. Although Mike Mira was still a third-tier company, according to the information, the company's market value was estimated to be about $20 million. Because the Wayne-Stan brothers had been working all over the world, they had accumulated a lot of movie resources in their film library. Moreover, Eric also knew that the most valuable thing about Mike Mira was not the company's brand, nor the movies in their film library, but the Wayne-Stan brothers. In his previous life, after the Wayne-Stan brothers gave up on Mike Mira in 2005, Mike Mira's glory was quickly lost. A few years later, it was sold at a low price by Disney. But now, although Wind and Moon had more than $100 million in income, and Eric could get another loan, it was not a simple matter of money to acquire both companies at the same time. It would definitely involve the exchange of shares. He believed that with the shrewdness of Robert Shea and the Weinstein brothers, even if he once again raised enough funds in the form of a loan and intended to fully acquire the other party's company, these people would not agree. How could a one-time deal be more practical than exchanging for the equity of a film company with great development potential? Just as he was thinking about these things, Jeffrey knocked on the door and walked in. "There's news from Venice. Terror of an Island has successfully entered the main competition segment. Also, Jonathan Demme made changes to the movie according to your suggestions. Eric, do you want to watch it again?" "Okay, I'll go to the screening room now." Eric nodded and temporarily put aside the idea of acquiring both companies. He got up and followed Jeffrey out of the office. "What were you thinking about just now? Why were you so lost in thought?" Jeffrey asked casually as he walked side by side with Eric. "You know the information about New Line and Mike Mira." Eric replied, "I want to acquire both companies at the same time, but I don't want to give up too many shares." Jeffrey was a little silent. Once the company expanded, Jeffrey understood that with his own talents, he would definitely not be able to support the entire company's operations. After all, he only needed to be responsible for a few movies that Eric produced and invested in. He did not even have to worry about distribution. After acquiring the new company, Firefly would definitely start to dabble in distribution. Jeffrey had no ability in this area before, so he would definitely have to give up the position of CEO. However, after only a short struggle, Jeffrey quickly felt relieved. As long as Firefly was still Firefly, it was fine. Didn't he want to run Firefly into a large film company? Now that there was this momentum, it was fine if he had to give up the position. Since his own stubbornness in making movies led to the bankruptcy of the original Firefly left by his wife, Jeffrey became very self-aware. For example, although he occasionally complained about Eric's movie production and gave small opinions, he never intervened in the content production of movies because he knew that he did not have the ability in this area. After thinking it through, Jeffrey patted Eric's shoulder and said, "Take it slow. I've also read the information of these two companies. To be honest, I'm leaning towards the new line. It's worth it even if I have to exchange some of my shares. The scale of Mira Mike Mira is too small. I don't see what you like about this company." Eric smiled and said, "You will understand in the future." As the two talked, they walked into the screening room of Firefly together. Jonathan Demme probably stayed up late again, so there were faint dark circles under his eyes. It was obvious that he valued this movie. Chapter 163. In a misty mansion in the British Isles, the mistress of the house, Grace, woke up from a nightmare once again. She wiped the corners of her eyes and pulled herself together to start a busy day. Her husband was not at home, so she had to be strong. She did not know why, but some time ago, the servants in the house suddenly disappeared. So she posted an advertisement to recruit servants. Today, 3 people came to apply. A white-haired gardener, a hale and hearty old woman, and a cowering mute girl. The combination of the 3 looked very strange, but because no one came to apply for the job after the advertisement was posted for a long time, Grace still accepted them and introduced them to the rules of the mansion. Not knowing if it was because of the 3 people, all kinds of strange things began to happen in the mansion. Her daughter, Anne, claimed that she saw a little boy. Grace also heard some strange sounds from time to time. Moreover, she also found that the 3 new servants were always whispering to each other, as if they were planning something. Regarding this, Grace became more and more uneasy. Until one day, her husband, who had gone out to war, suddenly came back. The excited Grace thought that there was a backbone in the family and that life would return to normal. However, her husband didn't have the joy of reunion like Grace did. Instead, when he saw his wife and children, he became sad. After spending a few days at home, he suddenly left again. The strange happenings in the old house continued. Coupled with the fact that her husband had left once again, Grace's mental state became more and more tense. Finally, one day, she discovered that all the curtains in the old house had been torn down. Grace repeatedly emphasized that the 2 sick children should not be exposed to the sun. Thus, the furious mistress blamed all of this on the 3 servants and chased them out. One night, the 2 playful children jumped through the window and ran out of the backyard garden. The little girl, Anne, found 3 tombstones. Upon closer inspection, she was shocked to find that the names of the 3 new servants were engraved on the tombstones. At the same time, the 3 servants came out of the darkness again. Anne called her brother and ran to the door. Grace, who accidentally discovered the truth, also rushed out with a rifle. She protected the children and returned to the old mansion, blocking the 3 ghosts outside the door. While Grace was repeatedly praying for the 3 spirits to let her family off, the 2 children who had returned upstairs let out screams of fear. Grace prayed as she climbed up the stairs and pushed open a door. Because of the Spirit Master's spirit summoning, Grace finally saw another family in the real world. Everything made Grace face the reality. It turned out that she and the 2 children were already dead. Helplessly hugging the 2 children, the heartbroken mistress could not help but recall the sad past. In the dreamy cries of Grace and the 2 children, the movie officially ended. The ending credits had not been produced yet, so the lights in the screening hall were directly turned on. "Eric, how was it this time?" Jonathan Demme asked unconfidently. Although he had made a lot of changes according to Eric's suggestions, Jonathan was still not sure if Eric would be satisfied. Terror of an Island, wrapped up in mid-June. Part of the post-production was also carried out in the UK. Because some scenes had to be shot from time to time, the whole crew stayed in the UK until July before returning to the US. After the end of Dark War, Eric had visited the shooting site in the UK once to personally see the shooting site. After checking some of the scenes that Jonathan had shot, Eric was very satisfied with Jonathan's shooting results. Perhaps because of Eric's previous affirmation, when Jonathan confidently showed the version that he had edited, the so-called director's version, to Eric, he was still very confident that the version that he had spent a lot of effort editing would be recognized by Eric. However, reality poured a bucket of cold water on Jonathan's hopes. Eric frowned as he watched the edited version. He signaled the staff to play it from the beginning. At the same time, he quickly made notes as he watched. By the time the film finished playing again, Eric had already written more than 20 amendments on his notepad. They involved the camera, the soundtrack, the editing, and other aspects. Basically, it was equivalent to completely pushing Jonathan's edited version away. Although Jonathan was a little unconvinced, he did not have the final editing rights after all. He could only honestly make major changes according to Eric's suggestions. After completing the production according to Eric's suggestions, Jonathan looked at the film again and felt that this version was indeed much better than the one he had edited before. Not only was the plot more compact, but the suspense was also more complicated. Moreover, it focused more on the creation of a psychological suspense environment. This also made Jonathan admire this young man who was more than 20 years younger than him even more. Although Jonathan had done a lot of preparation work in order to get the position of director of this movie, and some of the ideas proposed at the beginning were also in line with Eric's vision, many of the techniques still could not escape the stereotype of old-fashioned horror movies. This was not that Jonathan did not want to change, but many habits could not be changed easily. Innovation was easier said than done in any circle. Hearing Jonathan's question, Eric didn't answer it immediately. Instead, he leaned back in his chair and carefully compared the differences and similarities between the original film in his mind and the one he had just watched. Among the 3 films that Firefly had invested in, Island Horror, Steel Magnolias, and Smell a Woman, Eric was most optimistic about the box office prospects of Island Horror. Therefore, he was most concerned about this film. For the other 2 movies, Steel Magnolias and Women by Smell, Eric had delegated much more power than Island Horror. Steel Magnolias was completely under the charge of Herbert Ross, and Eric did not even participate in the editing. Although the final editing rights of Women by Smell were in Eric's hands, he would also respect Al Pacino's opinions in the future post-production. In comparison, the production of Shock on a Small Island seemed to be a little stubborn. He also knew that it would be very hurtful to completely overturn Jonathan's director's edited version, but he had to do so in order to achieve box office success. The reason why Eric was able to list so many changes in one breath when he saw Jonathan's edited version was, of course, not because of his own talent, but because of the reference of the original film in his mind. Even if he had a little bit of talent in his previous life, it had been worn away after so many years. What was left was only the professional skills imprinted in his instincts and habits. He was like a master chef who had been in the kitchen for decades. He didn't need to use his brain at all and could cook up a table of delicious dishes just based on habit. For a movie, even if it was the same script and the same material, the film edited by different people would be very different. In Eric's previous life, he had heard that someone had edited a classic serious historical film into a vulgar comedy film by re-editing the scenes. The lines, material, music, and so on were unchanged, but the scenes were rearranged. Therefore, Eric did not ask for a perfect copy of Island Horror that was exactly the same as the one in his memory. Besides, the film in his previous life was not without flaws. For example, the plot of Grace's husband's return was too dull to create the tense and suspenseful atmosphere that a horror film should have. Eric had made some changes to the original plot in this version. After spending about 10 minutes to carefully compare it, Eric nodded gently. Not bad, basically it's done. We just need to make 1 or 2 small changes. As for the distribution, Jeffrey, except for Fox and Columbia, inform the people in charge of the other 4 major film companies to see if they are interested in participating in our internal test. Jonathan heard Eric's affirmative words and finally breathed a sigh of relief, but Jeffrey was a little hesitant. Eric, it's not good to not inform Fox and Columbia. After all, we have the closest cooperation with these 2 companies. Eric spread his hands and explained, according to the current situation, after Columbia is bought by the Japanese, there will be a lot of personnel changes. It's hard to say how the Japanese will manage Columbia after they get it. Even now, I'm a little worried about whether I can get the share of Dark War back on time, so it's better not to cooperate with them in the short term. As for Fox, they already have the distribution rights of my next 2 films. If we give it to them, it will only cause us to compete with our own film for resources. Jeffrey suggested, how about this? We will invite Fox and Columbia as usual. As for whether they cooperate in the end, isn't it still up to us in the end? If we don't invite them, it will be a little rude. Eric lowered his head and thought for a moment, then nodded. Well, we'll do as you say. Also, we'll put Steel Magnolias together for a test screening. As for Smelling Women, we'll put it aside for the time being. Let us slowly work on it. As long as it can be screened on a small scale at the end of the year, it'll be fine. Anyway, this film is used by him to compete for the Oscars. After the 2 of them finished discussing the distribution of the film, Jonathan Dime had a chance to interject. Eric, will you go to the Venice Film Festival in September? Yes, I will at least go during the opening ceremony or the award ceremony, replied Eric. Among the 3 major film festivals in Europe, the Venice Film Festival was the one with the closest ties to the Chinese film industry. Eric was very interested in the Venice Film Festival in his previous life. This time, there was a chance, so of course he would go. Speaking of which, it had been a whole year since his rebirth. Eric had been in a busy state and did not even have time to relax. Perhaps the trip to Venice could be treated as a vacation. As for the award, Eric did not have high expectations. Although the plot of Terror Island was very novel, the film was not only a commercial film, but also a horror film. Both of these categories were very discriminated against by the film festival judges. However, this film included both of these most disliked elements. It was already a good result to be nominated for the main competition section in Venice. Chapter 164. I got someone to find an apartment in Beverly Hills. The monthly rent is $4,000. You can call this number tomorrow and mention Alan Fisman's name. A real estate agent will sign a contract with you. That night, Eric returned home. After dinner, he took out a business card and handed it to Nicole. Before the girl could take it, a small hand quickly snatched the business card away. Wow, wow. Drew waved the business card in his hand and stared at Nicole with a victorious smile. So, you're finally moving out? Nicole shrugged helplessly and sat back on the sofa in a ladylike manner. She had no intention of coming over to fight for the business card, nor did she answer Drew's question. During this period of time, the girl had also come up with a way to deal with Drew. In the face of Drew's various provocations, although there were many times in the depths of her heart that she couldn't wait to rush into the kitchen to find a sharp knife and cut off that eyesore face of hers, from the beginning to the end, Nicole had a magnanimous look on her face that said, I won't lower myself to your level. She even guessed the reason why Drew was looking for trouble with her. Although this seemingly careless girl was only 14 years old, she was as shrewd as a little fairy. Nicole felt that the childish things she did were not really like ordinary children who gained pleasure from bullying others. She just wanted to make Nicole lose her self-control and even make her unable to bear the conflict with her. She even wanted Nicole to make some counterattacks when she was bullied. In that way, when the 2 of them became incompatible, one of them would definitely have to leave the mansion. Nicole was also sure that even if she was on the right side, the one who would be kicked out of the mansion in the end would definitely be herself. Nicole did not mind falling out with Drew, but she was afraid of losing the opportunity to be the female lead in Sleepless in Seattle. She was very afraid. After this period of contact and understanding, she had a deeper understanding of the value of being the female lead in Eric's movie. Therefore, she became more respectful in front of Eric. Compared to this opportunity, 2 months of being a servant in this mansion was like nothing. If she could ensure the result, she would not mind wearing a beautiful small uniform and being a maid for a year. Many women might not encounter such a good opportunity even after working for 8 to 10 years in Hollywood. In comparison, a month or 2 or even a year was nothing. In various media reports, not to mention Julia Roberts, even Brooke Scholes, who only appeared in Dark War for a few minutes, recently received a female lead role in a big production from Warner. The newspaper estimated that her salary was close to $3 million, which was almost the price of many A-list actresses. Before acting in Dark War, although Brooke Shields was beautiful and glamorous, she could only be regarded as a third-rate star at most. Moreover, her acting skills had always been criticized by the media, and her box office appeal was non-existent. Although Eric had made a series of promises before, and although there was a contract, the girl had always maintained a cautious attitude until the last moment. "Okay, Drew, give the business card back to Nicole. If you don't want her to leave, I don't mind letting her stay for a while." Eric glared at Drew, who was waving the business card, and said. Knowing that Eric was joking, the girl stuck out her tongue cooperatively. She rolled up the business card with a smirk, leaned in front of the girl, and directly stuffed it into Nicole's collar. In the end, she gloated and added, "Poor thing, there's nothing to hold, so it fell down." Nicole glanced at Eric. Although she knew that she would not get a response, she still showed an aggrieved expression. Seeing that Eric was still looking at a child playing, the girl could only reach out and cover the business card that fell on her abdomen. She got up and walked to the bathroom, ready to take it out. When Nicole went into the bathroom, the little girl directly jumped into Eric's arms. "What's wrong? Are you feeling bad?" Nicole didn't have it easy. She was bullied by you for more than a month and didn't say anything. If it were me, I would have poured sulfuric acid on your face. Eric smiled and gently pinched the girl's white and tender face. "She wouldn't," Drew snorted softly. He moved his body like a small snake and found a comfortable position to rest on Eric's lap. He reached out and touched the stubble on Eric's chin. Only a brainless girl like Jennifer Aniston would do that. And this woman, if it didn't benefit her, she would never do it. "Oh, the next time I see Jenny, I'll definitely tell her your comments." Drew smiled and waved his hand, looking indifferent. Whatever, let her face reality as soon as possible. Earth is so dangerous, it's only right for her to dig a hole and bury herself in it. Eric couldn't help but smile. Perhaps it was because he had watched that classic movie in his previous life. Eric would occasionally say words like Earth and Mars when he spoke. Unknowingly, the little girl in his arms learned it. "I think if Jenny were to dig a hole, she would definitely bury you first." Hee, she doesn't have that ability," Drew smiled and quickly became serious again. He slightly lowered his voice and said, "Eric, I don't care how you play with this stupid woman, but don't provoke that woman in the bathroom. It'll be troublesome if you get entangled with her." That's right. Ever since I got entangled with a certain little vixen, I don't dare to provoke women of the same type anymore." "I'm serious." Drew scratched Eric's chin in dissatisfaction. "Actually, it's also your fault. It's fine if others play with her, but you can't help but get entangled with her after you've played with her." Eric knew that Drew was referring to Virginia. He helplessly turned his head to avoid the little scratches. "Okay, I got it." The sound of leather shoes could be heard, and the two of them stopped talking at the same time. The girl returned to the sofa and sat down. She didn't show any abnormality and continued chatting with Eric as usual. However, she recalled what Drew said by accident just now. Then, she thought about how the little girl had been on guard against her during this period of time. She suddenly understood that she seemed to have missed a better opportunity. Originally, Nicole was a little complacent about getting this role without having to pay any price. Now, she realized that it was her real loss that she didn't pay any price. Chapter 165. Late at night, in Nicole's bedroom on the second floor of the villa, looking at the packed suitcase, the girl suddenly felt that the experience of the past 2 months was like a dream. 7 years ago, she got the opportunity to play a role in a music video for the first time. It was also that experience that made her feel that maybe her life could be more dazzling. Beautiful women were always very ambitious. So she quickly dropped out of the girls' high school, looking for opportunities while studying at the drama school. In a few years, she played some supporting roles in many movies and TV series, and also won the Best Actress award at the Australian Film Academy. But these were far from enough to make the girl feel satisfied. Her eyes never stopped on the small pool of the Australian entertainment industry. She yearned for Hollywood. At the beginning of the year, she participated in a Hollywood movie audition in Australia. She was full of confidence, but in the end, she still didn't get the role. Then she found that she was already 22 years old, and she couldn't wait any longer, so she packed her luggage and came to Los Angeles alone. Then she quickly realized the cruelty of reality. Her acting qualifications and the acting awards she received in Australia didn't help her career much. She was basically like a newcomer, and could only get some small roles in some unknown movies or TV series. Then, 2 months ago, her career finally ushered in a big turning point. She was seen by the young director Eric Williams, who suddenly rose to fame in Hollywood, and then she got the lead role in his new film. How could there be such a good thing? Walking out of the office, the girl began to think of this voice in her heart. She spent the next few days in a fierce struggle of emotions. She was very, very eager to get this opportunity, but she felt that if she agreed, what awaited her would be a hellish life of horror, and it might become a nightmare for her life. She was not a little girl who was inexperienced in the world. A few days later, she finally couldn't resist the desire to be famous and took the initiative to come to the door. But the horrible situation in her imagination didn't happen. He really just dressed her up beautifully, and then she washed, cooked, and cleaned the room for him every day. His life was healthy and regular, without bad habits, and without the vanity of a young man who became famous. He was only 18 years old, but he was calm like a middle-aged man who had experienced the world. He was young, rich, talented, handsome, and steady. In the eyes of most women, he had all the qualities that a man could possess. Even if she rationally told herself that it was impossible and that it was better to be safe, she still couldn't help but have a faint admiration for this man who was younger than her. In the beginning, she had tried to get close to him, but unfortunately, she didn't succeed and instead made a fool of herself. He even regarded her seductive actions as a performance, and watched it with relish. If she didn't know that he had a girlfriend, a little minx at home, and would occasionally spend the night outside, she would definitely think that he was gay. The proportion of gay people in Hollywood was too high. She put on her pajamas, tidied up the uniform she had been wearing for a long time and hung it in the wardrobe. She closed the wardrobe, turned around and climbed into the Pang-Mu bed, and turned off the lamp. In the darkness, a slender figure kept rolling for a while. Perhaps she should try it again. She remembered the conversation between Eric and Drew after dinner. She couldn't help but come up with such an idea. Although she couldn't be this man's girlfriend or wife, it would save her 10 years of hard work, but at least she should leave a deep impression on him. From her analysis of the conversation between the two people, doing so would certainly be helpful to her career. After a while, she finally thought of a good excuse. Actually, it wasn't really an excuse. She originally intended to tell him in the evening, but Drew, that little goblin, was always there. She didn't want to be laughed at by that hateful little girl, so she planned to tell him tomorrow when she left. Now, it just came in handy. Turning on the light, the girl sat up, thought for a moment, and opened the packed suitcase. She found a bottle of perfume and sprayed it on her body. She rarely used this perfume, because after she used it once, he said that the smell was too strong and he didn't like it. In order to please him, she didn't use it again. But this time, it might be useful, because the perfume was musky rose. She looked at her watch and sat there for a while. When the hand of the watch pointed to 12 o'clock, she gently opened the door and carefully walked through the corridor to Eric's door. She gently knocked on the door a few times, took a deep breath and patiently waited. She knew that he could hear her. He was usually busy in the study until 11 o'clock, so he certainly hadn't fallen asleep yet. After a moment, the door opened. Eric, who was wearing pajamas, looked at Nicole with a puzzled expression. His eyes flickered a few times. "Nicole, it's so late, what's the matter?" "Eric, this matter is very difficult to talk about, but I don't know many people in Los Angeles, and there is no one who can help." Nicole's calm expression became nervous. "Huh?" Eric still didn't move aside to let the girl in. "I mean, can you lend me some money? Didn't you say that the rent for the apartment is $4,000 a month? But I don't have much money now." Nicole's voice became slightly stuttering. It wasn't an act. She did have a stutter when she was a child, and although it was cured when she grew up, she would still stutter when she was nervous. Eric held the door frame and nodded. I see. Wait a moment. I'll go get the checkbook. As Eric spoke, he turned around. Just as he was about to remind her of something, the girl had already followed him into the bedroom. Eric could only let nature take its course. Fortunately, he had forced the girl into the closet. Otherwise, it would be troublesome if she was discovered. Is 100,000 enough? Eric found the checkbook and looked up at the girl. Nicole quickly nodded. It's enough. I'll pay you back as soon as I get the money. Don't worry, you can pay me back when you have the money. I'm sure you'll have the money after your first movie is released. At the beginning of the year, Julia was still living in a rented apartment. Now, not only has she bought a mansion in Beverly Hills, but she has also hired several assistants and bodyguards. She's more important than me. Eric casually talked about Julia's interesting things as he lowered his head to fill in the checkbook. Chapter 167. Although the two of them had an intimate relationship, Nicole didn't stay in Eric's mansion for another day. She obediently moved into the apartment that Eric had someone find for her that day. It was August. For a movie that was in its fourth week of release, Dark War's $26 million box office was still strong. The total box office was more than $150 million. Although it would take a lot of luck to surpass Batman's box office in the coming weeks, there was no doubt that the movie's total box office in North America would exceed $200 million. Moreover, Dark War was more popular in the overseas market than in North America. Although it was released later in most overseas countries than in North America, and there were even some countries where it had not been released yet, Dark War had won 12 first-week box office titles in the countries where it had been released. Under such circumstances, it was certain that the overseas box office of Dark War would be much higher than in North America. Although Columbia had invested in the movie with the intention of not making a profit and only wanted to push up the stock price, the fact was that not only could they recoup their investment, but they could also make a lot of money just from the box office alone. Columbia was destined to take a large share of the video revenue. Although it would take a long time for the video to recoup its investment, in the next few years, the revenue would bring Columbia Pictures hundreds of millions of USD in profit. For Eric, the project of Dark War was already in the past. He just had to wait for his share of the profits. Dark War was such a popular movie, and according to Hollywood's usual practice, there would definitely be sequels. However, to be safe, Eric did not plan to participate in the production of the sequels. It was difficult to surpass the first classic. In his previous life, the sequels of Dark War did not have many highlights. If the script of the future sequels was good, Eric only planned to let Firefly participate in part of the investment. If the Japanese could offer a good price, Eric would even sell Firefly's half of the copyright of Dark War to them. After all, without Cruise, without Eric, and with only Hanks left, it would be difficult for the sequels of Dark War to replicate the success of the first movie. Based on the investment practice of this kind of movie, the cost of the second movie would definitely increase greatly. It would not be easy to make money then. After the Dark War project was over, Eric began his intense work for the second half of the year. First of all, he had to personally film the first 2 episodes of Friends. For this reason, Fox had already released this gimmick. Because of the insertion of Friends in Dark War, the public was also looking forward to this TV series. Sleepless in Seattle, which was the second last movie of the year, was actually the last one that Eric would put his heart into producing. Although Fox valued Home Alone very much, this movie would not consume much of Eric's energy in any case. Moreover, he planned to use the second script from his previous life, so it would be easier to shoot. Although Sleepless in Seattle was only in the early stages of preparation, the early publicity work had already begun, and the news of the leading actors was soon revealed. When they saw that the names of the leading actors and actresses had been decided, many actors in Hollywood who wanted to work with Eric were disappointed. Tom Hanks was not questioned as the leading actor, but Nicole, who seemed to have suddenly appeared, became the target of the media. With the announcement of the lead actor, Nicole's personal information was dug up by powerful paparazzi in just a few days. Australian actress, won acting awards, debuted at the age of 16, and had no acting experience in Hollywood. When this information was revealed, the girl quickly became the focus of a wave of controversy. The fact that Hollywood looked down on foreign actors seemed to have infected the media. Therefore, apart from the promotional materials arranged by UTA for the girl, Nicole basically didn't receive many words of recognition. It was almost one-sided criticism. Most of the media felt that Nicole didn't deserve to be the female lead in Eric's new film. From the title of Sleepless in Seattle, the media also guessed that Eric was likely to return to a romantic comedy like Pretty Woman. Therefore, the Hollywood media ignored Nicole's current image, and instead enjoyed digging up Nicole's rustic image in Australian movies and TV series, criticizing the girl as worthless. Of course, this kind of criticism would also be counterattacked. The biggest reaction was the Australian media. Although Eric only had a few works, and his rise was not long ago, he had accumulated a lot of fame in Australia, no less than those famous directors who had been famous for many years. Therefore, the Australian media was proud that their country's actress could participate in Eric's new film, and also launched a lot of counterattacks against the American media's criticism of Nicole. Nicole, who was in the center of the storm, did not feel any pressure at all. She understood that the more the media made a fuss, the more fame it would bring to her. On the 2nd of August, in a studio on the set of Fox, the filming of Friends started. Among the 6 leads, only Jennifer Aniston was a little famous. The other young people were all unknown characters before. Eric chose them not only because of their acting skills, but also because they were very similar to the images of the leads in Friends in his memory. In addition, as newcomers, these actors' salaries were very low, only $5,000 per episode. Eric originally wanted to secretly give Jennifer Aniston a higher salary. The salary was confidential, and as long as he did not say anything, the other members would not know. Even if the other 5 found out, they would certainly not say anything. Jennifer Aniston was not only more famous than them, but she was also the producer's daughter and the director's girlfriend. If they really compared themselves to Jennifer Aniston, they were simply asking for trouble. However, Eric's kind suggestion was rejected by Jennifer Aniston, and she took the same $5,000 per episode as the others. Eric could not persuade the stubborn girl, so he could only leak the news. Unsurprisingly, it received a good effect. Jennifer Aniston quickly became good friends with the other 5 leads, just like in his previous life. This result was very beneficial to the filming of Friends. After all, if they became real friends in real life, they would definitely have a better understanding during the filming process. Everyone get ready. Friends Act 1, Scene 5, Action. Following the voice of the script clerk, in a cafe in Central Park, several of the leads began to chat. The scene was Ross, who had divorced his wife, appeared in the cafe with an umbrella in his hand, looking depressed. In the original version, Ross Geller, who was played by David Simeon, shocked many of the audience when he appeared for the first time. With just a simple word of hi, the audience instantly remembered the image of this tall and thin man wearing a large coat. You're tuning in to the Narrate and Escape YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.